stories. One night in November of 2017, when I was 22 years old, my mom and I went grocery shopping. While standing in the bakery section, my mom and I ran into my aunt, and the three of us stood there and chit-chatted for a while. I had been feeling generally uneasy around this time because I had recently been watching a lot of YouTube videos about true crime and creepy encounters. I was having trouble sleeping and had been getting scared when I was home alone and heard the tiniest noises. Due to this uneasiness or paranoia, I guess, I was very alert and on edge at the bakery at my grocery store. I stood there with my back to the bagels and kept an eye on everyone walking around past us as my mom and aunt shared stories. Nobody seemed suspicious until I caught the eye of a prematurely balding man. He looked like your average mid-30s brooding neckbeard nice guy. I remember thinking to myself, God, he's kinda creepy looking, isn't he? As he walked through the produce section into the bakery, but then I started to feel bad. Chill out, you're being way too judgmental, I told myself, going so far as to even smile at him out of sheer guilt. He's probably staring at you because you're staring at him. He's just glancing on his way by. He's going to forget about you the second he takes his eyes off of you, right? Wrong. I completely forgot about this experience for a few blissfully ignorant months. Then in January, I received a messenger request from an old friend I'd like to touch with. My long-lost friend was the first of many to reach out, saying that there was a lot of buzz on Facebook about a local sex offender who had been taking pictures of young women with hair he deemed pretty, some in their 20s like me, some well below the age of 18, and posting them on a picture sharing site. I don't know exactly how, but his online albums stocked with, and I am not exaggerating, thousands of these pictures had been found, and a bunch of screenshots were being plastered all over Facebook to raise awareness. My old friend saw a few pictures of me standing against the bagels, flanked by my mother and my aunt, my long hair hanging down, and my post-French braid waves. I felt sick to my stomach when I saw the screenshots. I told my family about what I just found out, and my brother immediately called the police to report it. As he was talking to an officer, I received more screenshots, this time of the creep's sex offender registry page. It was the man from the grocery store, the man I was initially unnerved by, the man I felt guilty about, the man I smiled at. When my brother got off the phone with the police, he told us that they had been flooded with reports all night. While sympathetic, the policeman my brother spoke to said there was nothing they could do, as the creep was legally within his rights to take those pictures of us out in public. The man was allegedly assaulted outside of a convenience store the night his pictures were discovered. Before he even realized it, he had been exposed, and he has since been arrested for possession of child pornography and an unrelated case. My brother had actually been aware of this guy long before, as he was apparently infamous on the net for being a sketchy white dude who was obsessed with Asian women, had a hair fetish, and oh yeah, was a convicted sex offender. So as they say, creepy photographer, let's not meet again. I met Jacob in my science class, but we actually started talking during a dumb assembly, and we sat together because we were both the loner types in our class. We had so much in common, and I grew to love him as a friend. We were really close. I was a very shy girl, never talked about what was going on with me mentally with anyone, but I could trust Jacob. I told him what my mother's boyfriend was doing to me. what Alex was like, and he helped me feel happy again. I told him how Alex was abusive and how I felt trapped with him. Jacob was always there when I got bruises and whatnot. Eventually, me and Alex had a fight, and I told him we were over because he only talked about sex. I felt like a weight was off of my shoulders for once. I told Jacob right away, and all he said was perfect. I thought it was a bit odd, but continued to hang out for the next few days. He suddenly asked me out, and I told him, Jacob, no, I just got out of a relationship that really fucked me up. I can't handle that right now. He seemed very upset, but understood, so I thought. I come into my science class early to see Jacob crying with the teacher for some reason. She was a great teacher, always helped people struggling. She looked at me and waved me over. Hey, I know you guys are besties. What's going on? I have no idea. Jacob says you don't want to be friends with him anymore. Did something happen? I never said that. He asked me out and I said no, I want to be friends. Oh, I'm sorry. But Jacob, can't you forgive your bestie? You guys have been so close. You don't want to throw that away, huh? He just never responded and didn't show for school for like a week. I was worried and just told him I was here for him and didn't mean to upset him. He came back and it's like he was a different person. He had a huge scar on his neck, like he had been choked or something, and big scars on his wrists. I immediately started bawling my eyes out and hugged him, asking what happened.
You don't love me, so I punished myself.
I dropped to the floor, crying, by my locker. I didn't know what to do. I loved my best friend, but I didn't want to date him. I just stayed by his side at all times. I tried to make him happy, like I used to. Nothing. He told me if I wanted to help, I'd have to kiss him better, and I just couldn't do that. Day after day, he told me how it's my fault he's depressed and hurting himself. So after a while, I started cutting, and because I was dealing with eating disorders, this didn't help. I just stopped eating for 2 months, where most of the time I'd switched to bulimia. I was so pale, my rib cage started showing a bit, and I looked unhealthy to the point my teacher got the school involved. I told them everything. I told them how I didn't want to lose Jacob, and I didn't want him to die because I didn't want to date him. And then he stopped coming to school. A month, and he was nowhere. I thought he was in the hospital or something. I asked my teacher if she knew if he was okay. She told me they sent him to a different school and that he wasn't allowed to talk to me or see me because he threatened other kids who I was close with that he would hurt me if they talked to me, and those kids told the school. A few months later, I finally started to try and get better after we moved back to my old town. I get a friend request. The profile picture is something like in a horror film. It's Jacob with bloody bandages on his face revealing only one eye, and under the name of Gregory Black. I did not accept it, but got some creepy messages about how I'm not smart and that I make him go crazy, and how his mother threw him into a psych ward or something and he finally got out. I have no idea if anything he said was true, but honestly, I got fed up with him. I didn't care about him being my old bestie. He was awful, he needed help, and he refused it. I blocked him, and I haven't heard from him since. So Jacob, let's not meet again. Now I'm healthy. I eat 3 meals a day, and I'm sober. I still have anxiety and depression, but I plan on getting help, and though I wish no harm on him, I really do hope he gets the help he needs. Know your worth and know when you need to leave. This leads into why I was so messed up with the neckbeard story. Even with all of this bad shit that happened to me, I don't look for sympathy. I only hope that if you are struggling to get help or leave a situation before it messes you up. I definitely learned a lot through my experiences, and I am proud of who I am today. Don't be afraid to ask for help or to tell your family or anyone you can trust to get out of a bad place. Last year I would pick up my sister from school since she didn't have a car and I wasn't going to college. She was 17, I was 19. Now my sister was your typical neckbeard bait. She's fairly attractive, long blonde hair, green eyes, and a great personality. She's a joy to be around and seems to like everyone and everything. She's watched quite a bit of anime and reads a lot of manga. Her friend group was normal, filled with people who fit her interest and personality. I've talked to quite a few of her friends, one of them being my own. They're all chill, really good people, which makes it so weird that the neckbeard was a part of it. Neckbeard wasn't the stereotypical neckbeard in terms of look. He was actually very attractive. He was lean, never smelled like BO, and wasn't greasy. He did, however, have a bit of a neckbeard growing, so by looks, you wouldn't expect it. He liked anime and all of that, but his personality was just god-awful. He was constantly putting others down, subtly, but it was still there. He was a major creep. It was freaky scary how good he was at manipulation and making it seem like he wasn't degrading his and Elle's friends, as well as Elle, even if he was. Once I met him, I disliked him. I have a lot of experience with people like him, so I knew pretty quickly what type of guy he was. I voiced these concerns to Elle, but she brushed them off, believing there was good in everyone. The first time I met him was when I went to pick up my sister from an after-school club. I forget which one, but Neckbeard was in it too. She asked me to give him a ride home as well, so I decided that, since he was her boyfriend, it wouldn't be that bad. Oh ho ho, how wrong I was. Right off the bat, he'd noticed my shirt.
Is that a Green Day shirt? I love them.
Oh really? They were one of my favorite bands.
Yeah, I'd totally love to have a night with the singer, you know, alone. Come to think of it, you kinda look like him. What's your name?
Me, starting to become very uncomfortable. I'm Gerald.
I just love that name. It rolls off of the tongue nicely.
I started to get very uncomfortable now. Elle didn't seem to notice, so I didn't mention it, not wanting to ruin her day. Normally, saying I looked like Billy Joe Armstrong would be an ordinary compliment I'd receive. I'd had the same hair as him and somewhat the same fashion sense, but the comment before the comparison rubbed me wrong, and the part about my name even more so. I stopped the conversation there, and we didn't say anything else to each other until I dropped him off.
Thanks for the ride. Maybe I'll see you later.
He gave me this awkward wink before walking away, and Elle moved to the front seat. I don't fucking like him. He's nice. Once you get to know him, really, Elle replied. She seemed set on that, so I didn't push the topic more. Over the next few months, I'd seen a lot more of Neckbeard. Enough to see that he was not the kind of guy I wanted around Elle, or anyone, really. He was perverted and degrading, and I absolutely despised him. But the encounter I'd like to talk about is what happened on Elle's birthday. She invited all of her friends, including Neckbeard. I'd gotten a hold of some alcohol through my friends, where I live, it's illegal to drink underage with consent from parents, and I baked a cake. The whole house was decorated, and everything seemed to be going great. I stayed away from the group, letting Nell have her fun around with her friends, and drank by myself on the couch, making sure that nothing got too bad. I talked to one of mine and Nell's mutual friends. F hung out with me towards the middle, when I started to get drunk enough to act a bit out of character, but not enough to not remember what would happen. Dude, look. F motioned behind me. I looked where he suggested, only to see Neckbeard staring at me from where he sat with Elle and her friends. I looked away. You're all he talks about now, you know. He's got one hell of a crush on you. Oh, really? I've only had like 2 conversations with him. Yeah, it's crazy. It makes Elle hella weirded out. As if he could hear us talking about him, Neckbeard sat next to me on the couch, close enough to have our thighs touching. Hi guys. F. I think Elle is going to start a game of Uno. She wants you to join. F decided to join Elle, giving me a sympathetic look as he left me with Neckbeard. Good God, once we were alone, it started. His hands never left me. They were always on a part of me, whether it was my clothes or actual body parts. I never liked being touched much, so it creeped me out and put me on edge. At this point, though, I was too drunk to be able to do anything about it. Hey, Gerald, you seem to be close with F. Huh? Oh yeah, he's a good friend. His tone, from what I remember, was slightly off, as if he was angry at me. How have you been? You look good. It's been a while since I've seen your pretty face. I shifted away from him then. I remember not wanting to be anywhere near him as he said that. What made it worse was his hand was on my arm. I wanted to vomit. Thanks. Could you please not touch me?
Why? Are you gay?
That was a head spinner at the time. I wasn't out to a lot of people then. Only L, F, and some of my other friends. I asked how he knew that, and he said he saw L texting me about it once. I sighed. Aren't you dating L? Yeah, it's recent, and it's not like I'm not allowed to experiment. His hands moved to my thigh, and I attempted to shift away. But I drank a lot by that point, that I wasn't anywhere near strong enough to move his 6-foot body with my 5'6" one. He moved to press into me more and grabbed my chin, forcing me to kiss him as I tried to wiggle away. It didn't work. He shifted to move on top of me, his knees pushed against my crotch. Just let it happen. I promise it'll feel fine. I started to have a panic attack as memories of past years came back from his actions, and I started to sob. I all but screamed at him to get off, called L's name, and started to thrash around. He seemed to get scared by my actions and jumped off. I don't remember what happened after that, as I was in the middle of a panic attack, but I was told he left, and L and F helped me up the stairs to my room. My friend Mike is generally a good person, but he is a neckbeard, a gay neckbeard. Yes, the stereotype of the fedacious, fashion-obsessed gay man is, in fact, just a stereotype. There is absolutely nothing wrong with being gay, but neckbeards are still neckbeards. What frustrates me about Mike is that he is almost 40 years old, but is only attracted to young men. He weighs over 350 pounds, is lazy, smells, has graying hair, has bad teeth, bad skin, and lives paycheck to paycheck. He complains about being lonely and depressed, but seemingly has no interest in dating within his own age and tier. He has brief hookups on Grindr, then laments that none of them want to start a long-term relationship. In his 20s, Mike also had a history of having sex with straight men in relationships with women. This happened quite a lot, so it's funny to me to think how many straight butch men in the world have had gay sex secretly, but have never told anyone. Then Mike would be upset later that the guy wouldn't leave his girlfriend for him. A few years back, when Mike was in his 30s, he had a neighbor named Harry. Harry was just 1 year underage, but Mike befriended him and says that it was Harry who made the first move and expressed interest in having a relationship. Mike at least waited until Harry's birthday to begin sexual activity. Harry's dad didn't like Mike being around his son. Mike thinks it's because the dad's an asshole, or maybe it's because he thought it was strange that this creepy 30-year-old enjoyed being around his younger son and was obviously attracted to him. Oh wait, no, it's because Dad is homophobic and Harry, wanting to be with Mike, got Harry kicked out of his house, putting the young man in a very precarious position. They eventually broke up after Harry made a false claim of rape against Mike to the police, or at least I think it was false. Since Mike is my friend, I've chosen to believe him when he says that he didn't do anything. The claim did not go anywhere, and Mike says Harry apologized for lying a couple of years later. I can't think of any motivation that Harry would have to make a false rape claim unless his father put him up to it, or Harry decided he wasn't gay anymore, or wasn't sure he was. I don't know what happened to Harry, or if he's still gay. I tried to explain to Mike that regardless of what happened, what he did was maybe kind of sorta grooming. Mike obviously doesn't see it that way, and thinks he was helping Harry by being there for him to talk about Harry's gay feelings, since Harry lived in a homophobic household. Because Mike's my friend, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Ever since then, Mike says that he has always been sure to check if a guy is of his age before starting anything with them. But it creeps me out that that even has to be a question. One of the guys he hooks up with on Grindr lives with his mom, and when he goes over there for sex, they have to do it quietly. Like, what kind of grown adult has to do that? Mike and I still are great friends, but his personal life choices continue to annoy me as he continues pinning for young men way out of his league, and then whines about being alone. I'm not gay at all, so I don't know what it's like in the community. Is Mike's situation normal? My instincts say that it's not. I mean, this would be creepy if we were talking about a heterosexual neckbeard, right? As a female who has been playing World of Warcraft for 15 years now, I've met a lot of creeps, but only a few have made me feel unsafe. To start off, I've always had a laptop since I was in high school, a luxury back then. I worked hard to earn enough money to buy one. My mom almost took my money I earned for drugs, but luckily money I made in tips were in cash, so it was easier to hide it from her. At first my mom was mad I bought myself a laptop, but she soon forgot like everything. My dad could care less, and my older brother already had his own, so I started playing World of Warcraft with him at 14, and back then, girls were unheard of. So I got the usual creeps who usually backed off after hearing my age, or they were young too, but not this guy. This guy loved that I was underage. I was about 16 and used to creepy guys at this point, no longer a noob at the game or fending off the creeps. It was no longer a surprise. A new guy in the guild started hitting on me. Now I was 16, dumb, young, horny, and stupid, but I knew I wasn't going to find love on World of Warcraft, where you knew no one in real life. Plus, I had the ultimate crush on a guy I could not have, because he was my brother's best friend. But in my mind, back then, I only wanted him, so it was easy to turn guys down, despite being desperate as hell for one guy. But all of that changed after my brother's friend went off to college. I had a part-time job with my brother's friend, but girls at work surrounded him and I became demoralized. I'd never find love. Cue 19-year-old guy on World of Warcraft who made me feel wanted. I had a camera phone, so I could send and post pictures at that age. And back then, I mostly used Facebook, MySpace, and PhotoBucket. I lost a lot of weight my sophomore year, so I posted confidently bikini pics and sexy pictures, thinking I'd lure the attention of my brother's friend, whom was 19. So when this guy, who was also 19, liked me, it didn't faze me. He looked the part in his photos, and his younger brother was my age, so I thought he was extremely attractive in his photos, and even proved it was him in his pictures by holding items I asked for. He started paying my World of Warcraft subscription, which in the long run, I realized it was to get my home address and my real name. I was so stupid and heartbroken over my brother's friend. Years of teaching myself online safety and the ability to be strong against flirts was all but lost in the fog. We'd talk for hours on Ventrilo, and he'd make me feel pretty. I was completely blinded by this point. He sent me gifts, and I didn't even question how he had my address. Then he offered to drive and pick me up. As only then I suddenly get cold feet. I had a good friend on World of Warcraft, someone my brother met at PAX and joined the guild, and is still one of my best friends to this day. He was 6 years older than me, but never creeped on me. Was more like the protective brother I lacked. He caught on to it through conversation, and was my words of wisdom in a time I was lacking any of my own. He saw something was fishy when I could not. I told my friend I was scared to meet him because dumb teenager logic. I thought he would not like me. My friend chimed in that I shouldn't meet anyone off of the internet at my age. I told him about the gifts, and I swear I have never been scolded like this in my life, not even by my own parents. But he always cared like that. He wondered why I would give my address to someone I have never met, and the expensive gifts I got were not something the average 19-year-old could afford. None of this ever clicked for me, of course, because I was lonely and trying to prove, I don't know, to myself, my crush, or something, I could get a boyfriend. Like that, I told the guy it wasn't wise to meet in person, and my parents said I wasn't allowed to. That's when it went dark. At first it was pestering over and over, guilting me over gifts he gave me, and encouraging me to defy my parents. While he kept bothering me, it never once occurred to me he'd lose his shit. While my friend was worried shitless about the guy having my address, going as far as to drive the 11 hours to my house and explain the situation to my dad, as I refused to tell him out of fear of getting in trouble at the time, all while taking his spring break in my state instead of his own with his friends. There's a reason he's still one of my best friends. He has a little sister of his own as well, and she's my age, so his protective nature is natural. Eventually, he made me block the guy, and that was that. This guy was pissed off. He'd go on different accounts to accuse me of gold digging and using him. Luckily, my friend was smart enough and had the foresight to change my World of Warcraft password, and even paid for my account for me taking this guy off it entirely, as one of this guy's threats was to delete my account. But it did not end there. It got worse, as he'd constantly find ways to message me and tell me how horrible I was, until about a month had passed. I was walking home from school, about 2-mile walk in wealthy suburbs of New England, which I had done for years. Many kids did it as well. It was a very safe town with no crime in it or surrounding towns. Without second thought, I took off with my backpack, put my headphones in, and started my 20-minute walk home. It was cold, so I had my earmuffs over my headphones, only drowning out sound more too. I swear, if I could talk to myself as a kid, I'd probably just slap myself for stupidity, because World of Warcraft guy knew I walked home every day. As I talked about it, he knew my address, and I never thought twice. I was on the back roads walking home, and honestly, easy to map from my school to home, as it was pretty straightforward with only one turn. At halfway home, in between songs, I heard a vague crunching sound of tires rolling over gravel on the road slowly. I turned around to see a tinted black car that you couldn't see much of the person in front. I jogged out of the driveway I was standing in front of, assuming it was waiting to turn in, but it didn't turn in. The roads were dead, and it didn't make sense for him not to go around. I swear, the saying that you go cold when you are terrified is absolutely true. It could have been a summer's day at 95 degrees, and my bones would have been cold. My heart just sank, and my breathing was uncontrollable. I felt like I had no control over my body as I realized this guy was following me. My blood truly ran cold, and my hands shook as tears formed and my skin felt tight. It only got worse as the second time I turned my head to see the car stop. I stopped. My world stopped. I couldn't stop staring, just froze and breathing like all my school books were on my chest, crying silently. My eyes hurt, with no tears or sound, as I just stood there. The door opened after what felt like hours, but only seconds, maybe a minute, and it was in fact him. It was the attractive guy from the photos, not a catfish, but something seemed different. At first I thought it was his angry expression, but soon realized he was definitely not 19, more like 30 plus. I could barely think over the loud sound of my heart racing as I stood frozen in place. I thought I was about to puke as I just stood there, and he spoke to me. He told me to get in his car or he'd light my house on fire and kill my dog. I honestly could not move. I could not reach my phone, and like some magic, we both failed to notice the little old lady on her porch watching this play out. Suddenly, I hear her yell, "Get away from that little girl right there before I kill you, you son of a bitch." We both turned to meet her eyes. Pissed off, small lady about 60 or 70 with white hair. I think she noticed me frozen in fear. As she told me to get over to her quickly, like that, I ran over to her, tossing off my heavy brick of a backpack. It was obvious he was unsure what to do next as he stood there and watched me run over to her. Must have been a sight, this tiny, thin old lady standing in front of a teenage girl yelling at this man to go away. Like that survivor number 2 joined the battle as her husband stepped out. Guy who looked like he had been through a war or two, with a shotgun, of all things, and booming voice, gun pointed, saying, "I have shot and killed men for less reason. You better fucking leave now." He got back into his car and drove off as I simply collapsed. All that fear just came out as I cried harder and harder as my brain sifted through the past few months of mistakes. After calming me down enough to speak in non-hyperventilating words, she asked me if I knew him. I told her kind of, but only online, from a video game, not real life. Of course, explaining it wasn't easy. She got on the phone with the school counselor, her daughter apparently, and told her my name. I was well known to her daughter, ironically, but it was only 250 or less kids in the school, and the town itself was small. Many staff at our school had family in town. Kids at school there were related to each other by their own children or their siblings' children. It was the kind of town you didn't leave. By a certain age, you were stuck there. So honestly, it seems ironic, but entirely not a huge surprise. The counselor was well aware of my family and my mom's drug addiction, as child services had been involved a few times. She came by in 10 minutes to pick me up and ask me a ton of questions, of course, knowing I did not want to involve the police, as I was scared of being taken away from my parents again. We weren't rich, but we were more well off than many. Though my mom worked, my dad kept my mom on a tight budget to keep her from buying prescriptions from Canada she wasn't prescribed. She knew all of this and knew, though rough, I was better off than foster care, which was a gamble with losing odds at best. Plus 2 more years and I'd be off to college anyway, so we didn't involve the cops. But she made me promise to take the bus every day and to inform my dad of the situation. She also called my dad at work to inform him and had a teacher make sure I got on the bus every day until I graduated even. Really sucked, but I understand. If it ended there, it would have been nice, but there's still a bit more, and I'm sorry for the length and the grammar. It's a late night, and I'm recalling from memory and typing on my phone. 2 days after this, my dad had to fly out for business. My brother was off at college, so it left me and my high mom, who promised my dad she'd stay sober while he was gone, but I was used to helping her while she was high. It was like taking care of a child. But I was on edge, as ever. Creak Inn, that big house from the 60s, cat stir at night, and dogs barking outside, set me on edge. I barely slept. My friend from World of Warcraft called me every night, making sure I was okay for the past month. I lived in the middle of the woods, next to a huge river in my backyard, so there was still a lot of wildlife outside in the dead silence of cold months. Running water is an important source of water when lakes freeze. I had been used to all of the bumps in the night, cats coming and going and dogs barking at every animal in the yard, but it all seemed new to me as I laid in bed trying to drown out my fears. The house I grew up in was a 6-bedroom house. I had a little sister too, but she stayed with my grandma in another state per court order while I was allowed to choose due to her only being 9 and me 16. The other rooms were used as a game room, an office for my dad, and a guest room for my sister when she visited with my grandma, and she had a room. So, in a large house like that, in the middle of the woods, it was scary to virtually be alone because my mom was completely defenseless because she was high. I was letting my last cat inside for the night, and at the end of the long driveway between my neighbor and our house was parked a black car. I quickly shut the door and locked it after my cat got inside. I made sure all 5 doors were locked and even put cardboard on the glass doors to the pool. I don't know, hoping if he broke them, it would delay him if the car was his. I went through the house and turned off all of the lights and got all of my cats into one room so I knew they were safe. Here's the thing about my dog. He's untrained for the most part, but was basically a giant lab puppy in his mind. But he growled at strangers, not barked like animals. We had to keep him inside if we had guests, but he never bit anyone. And if you spent enough time around him, he'd eventually accept you. Also, he didn't growl at all strangers either, so he wasn't the most reliable guard dog either, but he was big and had a deep bark. I mulled over what to do as I sat there in the dark with my dog waiting for a shadow to pass by the window. I eventually went upstairs to my mom's room and woke her up from her sleeping pill slumber. Groggy and still kinda high, she didn't quite grasp what I was telling her until I started crying. She sorta sobered up and asked me to get her some coffee, so I did, all while I'm watching my dog's every move because I knew he could sense something before I did. As my mom sobered, her fear in her eyes grew. Eventually, she got the idea to call my neighbors and ask them if they knew the car. The neighbors said that they didn't know whose car it was, and 2 men went out of their house to check the car out. The car was empty. At closer inspection, though, they noticed it was a newer car, a Lexus, and in the passenger seat was a laptop. The car was locked, but with a flashlight you could see somewhat into the tinted windows. They never told us why, but something they saw in the car prompted them to call the local sheriff. Only one, and he lived in town, sorta. We were too small to have a police department. He drove over about 15 minutes later, ran the plates, and asked the houses around about it. Apparently, it was a rental car from Ohio, and he was calling to see who rented it, but the offices were closed, I think. He stuck around his car for about an hour until someone came out of the woods and ran back in as the cop turned his spotlight on him. I couldn't see what he was pointing at with his light. He called for backup as 3 other cops showed up in 5 minutes from the neighboring town and highway patrol, at which a lady cop got out and asked to speak with her and call my counselor from school to explain who that might be. During the search, the police found something I didn't think about checking. The basement door was not just unlocked, but open. It's never unlocked, so I didn't even think to check it, as our backyard floods in the spring due to beaver dams, and it's got extra seals and stuff to prevent the basement from flooding again, but that stuff sealing it, which was mostly sandbags and stuff, were set aside. But the door at the bottom of the stairs was locked still, though, it had some damage, like someone tried picking. He had access to half the basement that was storage. The door between the section was like a front door. As in the summer, my dad left the hatch open to dry out the basement and adjust pool settings, as it was basically the pool house, and the cats loved it, so it also had a few cat beds. The section that led upstairs was locked from the inside, and the wall and the door were not drywall and cheap door, but lock and key, heavy door and wall was brick. My dad confirmed he had not left it open. My suspicions that black car was his was pretty much confirmed. As we walked through the house to make sure everything was still safe, the female officer got on my laptop as they searched the woods. I gave her everything I had, his photos, username, and she even checked to see if his credit card was still on my account, but it wasn't. But the last few digits were. She then asked to take my laptop for a few days, as she thought she could get some good evidence from it. I asked her to please not damage it and return it as soon as possible, because I used it a lot before smartphones. It was all I had. After a few hours and on-looking neighbors had gone to bed, the cops came back empty-handed, but left a cop outside our house and towed the guy's car away. From what the lady cop told me, what permitted such fear was in the car there were 2 guns, some sort of rope, and handcuffs, and the guy who ran back into the dense woods was wearing a winter ski mask. So eventually, I tried to lay down and go to sleep, and I'm pretty sure I was going to call out sick tomorrow, and kept all my cats inside for the day. I was too restless to sleep. Every sound made me so scared. My mom slept with the dog in her room, and my cats slept in my room most nights by choice, as my room was usually the warmest. At around 3:30 a.m., I heard a knock on the back door, and a guy say, "Undercover police officer, open up." I was still awake as I walked downstairs to make out a guy standing in the dark with a gun. As he saw me, he demanded I let him in now, as he needed to speak with me. Something felt off. The guy's voice seemed forced, like someone purposely making their voice deeper. And why was he at the back door? So I turned on a light outside, and sure enough, it was him. I just screamed. As quickly as I screamed, he started hitting the door hard. Wasn't a very loud horror movie scream, but more like a gasp scream. I don't think the fear in my body had a loud scream to let out, but the banging was pretty loud. As I ran to the front to see if the officer was still outside, he was, but he wasn't getting out of his car. I didn't want to run outside, as I'm not a fast runner, so I turned the porch light on, and a couple of times, but still nothing. After a minute, my dog came bolting down the door, barking and growling and foaming at the mouth. Soon followed my mom, who yelled she had a gun. She didn't, but bluff is bluff. Somehow, during all this, the cop outside had snuck around back and had his gun pointed at him, yelling to put his gun down. I wasn't needed in court for the trial, and my statement was enough. Come to find out, he wasn't even American. The car was rented under his friend's name, and after all was done, he was deported back to Canada. I assumed something with his passport would prevent him from coming back to the United States, as the cop reassured me he couldn't come back to the United States now. I don't know exactly what he was charged with, but I think my dad said aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, attempted kidnapping, and something else. And it also Turned out he was 32 years old, not 19, so I assume me, being a minor, carried a charge. A little bit of backstory. My neighborhood has recently had a series of break-ins, ranging from cars getting broken into in broad daylight at our neighborhood pool to having people's garages broken into. This isn't an unusual occurrence, as some sort of break-ins usually happens every summer. Recently, a house in the back of my neighborhood was targeted, but luckily they had a security camera set up in the corner of their garage. The family sent the video to the neighborhood watch, who then sent it to basically everyone in the neighborhood with the title Carpet Creeper. The video is pretty unsettling because you see a tall, lanky, older looking man walk up from the dark into the open air carpet. He was wearing a hat and sunglasses, even though it's pitch black outside. In the video, he walks with his back to the car and runs his hands along the car. He then walks around to the other side of the car and does the same thing, where he runs his back alongside it. Then you see him walk near the side door to the house, bend down and sort of crawl on the ground. He lingered in the carpet for around 8 minutes just walking around and touching things, and all he ended up stealing was a pair of nice tennis shoes from the homeowner left outside their house. So flash forward to tonight. My house has an open air carpet with a security light that is supposed to flash on when someone walks underneath it. With this being said, it's incredibly old and doesn't usually work as quickly as it's supposed to. Around 11:30 p.m., I took my dog out for a walk and the carpet light didn't come on, but I didn't think much of it, so I just turned my iPhone flashlight on to guide the way. After about 10 minutes of letting my dog walk around, I headed back down my driveway, noticing that the light was now on, but I figured it had just kicked on late. I went inside my house, locked the door, and walked directly to the sink to make a glass of water. I was about to walk down the hallway directly to my bedroom, but had remembered I had left my phone charger in the living room. As I turned around, I saw a tall, lanky man standing on my carpet. He was just standing there in between my parents' cars. I literally froze with fear as my back was pressed to the fridge and looked through the front door about 15 feet away, which is all glass, so it was a clear view. The man literally just stood there, as still as a statue, and a smile began to curl up his lips. And it was so fucking terrifying because he had sunglasses on, so I couldn't tell if he was looking right at me. It felt like the staring contest went on for minutes, but it was probably only 5 seconds, before he bolted out of my carport and back out into the driveway. I started crying because the thought of the man with at least a foot in height on me being in the same carport hiding behind a car as I walked my dog in and opened the door to my house absolutely terrified me. My parents called the police, but they couldn't do anything because the man ran away. I am now scared shitless to take my dog out at night again. My apartment complex is a nice, well-maintained building, surrounded by beaten-down, high-crime neighborhoods. My apartment complex has gates surrounding them that can only be opened by a member or by calling a resident and having them manually let you in. But that doesn't mean that it's impossible for trespassers to find their way inside the gates. One night at about 10 or 11 p.m., I pulled into my apartment after spending some time at my fiance's house. My roommate had taken the parking spot in front of our building, so I was forced to park off to the side of the buildings in an uncovered spot. It was a short walk to the apartments, but when I got out of my car, I realized that the lights in front of my apartment building were turned off. The building directly across from the building still had their front lights on, so I had figured that the bulbs were being replaced at 11 p.m. I was lucky that the lights from the other building illuminated parts of the pathway to my apartment, but my anxiety flared up and my imagination began to run wild. I pictured masked murderers jumping out from the shadows and whisking me away to a secondary location. My keys found their way between my knuckles as I created a makeshift weapon against the creatures that go bump in the night. I was so wrapped up into my own nightmares as I power walked into my building that I didn't realize someone was standing in front of me until I was almost on top of him. His back was turned towards me and his head was down. I thought he was lighting a cigarette and that was the reason for his strange pose. When I took a step or two closer, his head flipped around, and he was staring at me as if I was a ghost. He was wide-eyed and looked like an animal caught in a trap, facing a hunter. I literally jumped, but did my best to maintain my composure. My apartment complex is very small, and I have made sure to learn the faces of my neighbors. I didn't recognize this man as living in the complex, and he seemed as though he was homeless. His hair was long and unruly, and he had a beard with bits of matter clinging to his scraggly hair. His clothes were obviously worn, and he was wearing a jacket too big for him and too heavy for the Arizona weather. I continued walking, my grip tightening around my keys in my hands, just in case. I neared the staircase that led to my apartment and turned back when I felt eyes burrowing into me. The man stood where I had left a few yards away, but he had twisted his body so that his arms were frozen above his head, and one of his legs looked as though he was about to jump away. The whole contorted look made him look as though he was dancing the Running Man, but he was completely frozen, with his eyes glued to me as I moved for the stairs. We stood staring at each other. He looked like a screenshot of a 90s dancer, and I'm sure I looked like a drowned rat. I squeaked out an apology for interrupting him and ran up the stairs and into my apartment. I stood by my door, locking the peephole to see if he had followed me, one hand holding my cell with 911 ready, and the other wrapped around the baseball bat my fiancé had left me after the previous encounter at my complex. Thankfully, he didn't go up the stairs, and I was left with nothing but a bizarre story to retell. I did end up calling the apartment complex's manager, and he had informed me that the security officer was on his way to investigate. One time when I was a kid, my parents were getting ready to go on a trip for the weekend and leave me at home. I got a phone call on our home phone, and somebody asked if my mom was there, asking for her by name. Well, my name sounds very similar to my mom, so I thought they were asking for me. "This is she," I answered. Well, we didn't get very far into the conversation before I realized the mistake I made. He thought he was speaking to my mom. I should have just corrected him, but I was a bit socially awkward, so I figured I'd just end the call and never bring it up again. He then asked me if I was my husband. I told him no, he'll be away for the weekend. He then lowered his voice and told me,
"Well, I already know your mom won't be home this weekend, and I know your dad won't be either. You really shouldn't tell strangers things like that."
Then he hung up. I was petrified, but I was too scared to tell my parents because I didn't want to get in trouble for accidentally pretending to be my mom, so they left on their trip. I spent the entire weekend on edge, constantly making sure my windows and doors were locked, and keeping my dogs by my side every second, until I heard a crash in the basement. Unmistakable. There was a gate, so I know my dogs couldn't have been down there. I immediately called the police, as my parents told me to do so if I ever heard noises in the house. I waited for the police to show up hiding in my closet, ready to wet myself from fear. The police eventually showed up after about 10 minutes, and they investigated the basement and found no sign of anything. To this day, I have no idea what happened that weekend. Whether or not the crash was a coincidence, and the man was just a family friend trying to teach me a lesson about pretending to be my mom, whether someone found their way into the house but was scared off when they heard me call the police, nothing ever came out of it. But I still shudder to think what could have happened to me that weekend. I still don't like to be alone in the house over 10 years later. I work at a grocery store pulling carts and bagging things. It's a shitty job, but it pays the rent. I'm a 20-year-old female. I have posted about strange customers before, but this guy, he's a repeat offender. This has been going on for about 6 months. 6 months ago, I'm standing in the liquor section, dusting the bottles and making sure the display looks nice. A man about 10 or so years older than me enters the section and asks me to recommend him something. I answer honestly that I am 20 years old and therefore know nothing about alcohol. Yes, I've had it before, but I know jack shit about what's good and what isn't.
"Are you sure you're not 21?
He asked. Yeah, I'm sure.
That's a shame.
he says.
I could show you a good time if you were old enough.
And then he winks. I just kind of laughed awkwardly, not knowing what to do. Then I pretend someone needs me over in another section and scurry off. I brushed it off thinking that it'd be the last I heard from him. 2 months later, I'm picking up the slack for my sick coworker and stocking the shelves in his absence. It's about 10 at night and the store is dead quiet. I normally like these times because it gives me time to myself. I'm rearranging some cereal boxes to look nice when someone taps me on the shoulder. I jump and turn around. It's the guy. Generally, it's kind of a faux pas to touch random retail workers you don't know, but this guy didn't have a care in the world about that.
Are you 21 yet?
He asks. I shake my head no, remembering where I had seen him before. I ask him if he needs help finding anything.
No.
He says.
I just wanted to know if you were 21 yet.
And he turns and walks off without another word or without grabbing any merch from the shelves. He may have bought something later from another aisle, but I sure as hell didn't stick around to find out. 3 weeks later, I'm bagging in one of the check stands when he comes through again, posing the same question. I again answer no. And since there's a lot of people around, that's the end of it. And now, last week, I'm marking down a service walk about 7 in the morning. Basically, that means I walked to the store and made sure that there were no messes or safety issues. I'm at the customer service desk alone, and my back is turned. I hear someone clearing their throat and turn around.
Are you 21 yet?
He asks. He's staring intently, like he's trying to will me to suddenly be 21, and once again answer no. I am not 21. He scowls at me.
Are you sure?
He asks me again. Oh yes, I am quite sure. Thank you very much. Thankfully, my manager swoops in to take care of what he needed, and I get the fuck out of Dodge. I've told my managers about this dude, and they don't really seem to care. For now, he hasn't done anything but creep on me hardcore, but I worry. I was recruited by an agency when I was in college, around the age of 19. I never had an interest in it prior to the agency offer, so I was an industry novice but accepted the opportunity due to the earning potential. I have since retired from the industry and seriously wised up. When I first began, all of my photo shoots, fashion shows, and promo events were coordinated through my agency. I will admit, I was naive at the time and had little to no background on the industry. About 3 months after signing with my agency, I got contacted on my personal email from a photographer who was interested in booking me for a shot. It was odd, as I did not have social media or have my personal email and my phone number posted online for potential booking agents. However, I shrugged it off. Everything up until the point was all agency-based. The photographer was interested in building his portfolio and was offering $100 an hour for a high-fashion nature shoot. I was new myself and also looking to build my portfolio and make some extra money for only 2 hours of work. Because of that, I agreed to book the shot without the knowledge of my agency, as I did not want to sacrifice the 15% agency fee that they'd take. The shoot was scheduled at a nature reserve about 30 minutes from my university. Due to the nature of the shoot, the photographer was able to provide wardrobe, but not hair and makeup services. I was sent images of the wardrobe beforehand and approved based on the modesty of the apparel. When I arrived at the shoot, the photographer met me to show me the location he wanted to shoot at. No immediate red flags went off because it was more scenic off of the trails. His camera, wardrobe bag, and a few reflectors were brought along with us. I followed the photographer into the woods, and the further we trekked off the trails, the more nervous I became. About 20 minutes into our trek through the woods, the photographer decided to set up camp at a woodsy, remote location. He took out the wardrobes and expected me to change right there in front of him. The wardrobe looked nothing like the photos he had sent me. This hardcore bondage apparel. In addition to this, his behavior was odd. I could not exactly identify what it was about him that made me feel uneasy, but my gut was telling me that something wasn't right. The first red flag was the absence of his assistant and how unprofessional he seemed. After about 10 minutes of arguing about changing in front of him, he finally gave in and walked deeper into the forest to let me change. I honestly had no intentions of shooting in that attire, but I needed to get him to leave due to the aggressive tone he began taking. I heard him cussing and grunting under his breath as he walked a ways into the woods to give me privacy. At that point, I left with haste, dropped the money and wardrobe, and ran through the woods to my car. When I finally made it to my car, I could hear him running and yelling at me. I tore ass out of the nature reserve and did not look back. About 10 minutes later, I got a text that consisted of a number of nonsensical numeric characters and one that simply said LOL. When I got home, I saw one final text from him. He told me that I was missing out on a good time and that he was planning on having a good time with me in more ways than one. I called my service provider to have his number blocked immediately. I received approximately 20 emails from him about 1 month after the incident. I did not open them and sent them straight to my trash can. So after he completely removed all of his profiles from industry websites, I'm truly hoping that nobody had an experience like the one I had with him, and further, I'm truly hoping that he did not harm any other model who worked for him. I certainly learned my lesson after that, and have since gained an incredible sense of personal institution. Recently, I moved to an island in the South Pacific and had gotten the hiking bug, so I try and get out to new locations as much as possible. This happened about 2 weeks ago. Since I live in the South Pacific region, it gets mighty hot driving all by the most insane hikers indoors unless it's at night. Of course, I'm not a masochist, so I try to do all my hiking in the early hours of the morning or in the evening when it starts getting cool. I have never been afraid of going hiking by myself. I did it when I lived in Oregon and never ran into any problems with it. But my island isn't my friendly home state. I always carry pepper spray, and I used to go hiking in Montana and Wyoming and would sometimes carry a handgun to ward off anything I could not take on, whether it was a bear or a person. But I had always gotten off considerably lucky. I got to the trailhead at about 6:30 in the evening. The trail was called 1,000 Steps, but in all honesty, it was mostly just a walk straight down to the cliff and then a grueling journey back up. I did not want to go, but my dog, Mad Moxie, needed to be walked, and I had done the hike so many times I could probably do it in my sleep. The first thing I noticed when I pulled up was an old, rickety, rusted-out blue pickup truck with a plastic tarp over the bed to keep out the rain. These are pretty common on the island, affectionately earning them the name Guam Bombs. As I hooked up Moxie and started heading down the trail, trying my best to ignore the mosquitoes that were making a meal out of my exposed neck. Heading down the trail was relatively easy. Avoiding the banana spider webs, I felt the stress of my day slowly unwind as the underbrush grew darker and night approached. I made it all the way down to the water's edge when I noticed a man standing about 100 yards away. It was dark enough now that I could only see his silhouette, so I have no idea if he was looking at me or at the water, but I chose to ignore him and instead pull Moxie's ball from my backpack and throw it for her a few times to get her wiggles out. After some time, the man started walking over to me and stopped maybe about 10 feet away. Now, I'm a fairly tiny woman. I'm 23 years old and I stand about 5'6", and this guy was just a couple of inches taller than me, but most of the locals were on the smaller side. But something about him just felt weird. Evening, I greeted as he nodded and looked down at Moxie, who had just returned from running after her ball. I swooped down to pet her now sweaty head as the man kept his eyes trained on my dog. "Can I help you, sir?" "Pretty dog," he responded mildly. "You are alone." "I have my dog," I said lamely, trying to sound braver than I was feeling. "I'm never alone." I tried to emphasize on the fact that I had a dog with me. but the man seemed unfazed by my statement. "Oh, have a good night." With that, he turned around and started walking back towards the trailhead. I watched the shadow disappear into the trees and waited for about half an hour before I too started walking back towards the path, my mind on high alert as Moxie pulled me through the trees and up the cliffside. The crickets pierced the night as I climbed the steps, illuminated by my flashlight. My hands were full with Moxie's leash and my light, but you can bet your buns that I would have pepper spray out if I had an extra hand. Finally, my light pierced the trees at the top and I practically booked it up the hill. When I got to the top, I nearly shat myself. The rusted blue pickup was sitting in the parking lot still, but the passenger side door was practically touching my car's driver's side. Inside the car, I could faintly see two men sitting in the cab, and I could feel them watching me. Slowly, I approached my car, walking as far over to the passenger side as I could, and kept Moxie with me as close as I opened the door and crawled over to the driver's side. The door of the pickup truck flew open, and my dog started going apeshit, barking at two people who were now outside of their car, trying to break into mine. Hard in my chest, I rammed the keys into the ignition and turned out of the parking lot so quick I nearly took my mirror off. I called my mom as soon as I got home, and she begged me to call the police. Unfortunately, the police here on this island aren't as vigilant as they are on the mainland, and that area is known for car thefts, mugging, and other debaucheries, as I learned from my co-workers later that week. Earlier this month, another girl actually disappeared from the area without a trace, and it makes me wonder if the men in the blue pickup truck had something to do with it. If I did not have Moxie with me, I would have been mugged or worse. If I learned anything from this experience, it's that for my lady hikers, please always take pepper spray with you. Go hiking in groups and always let someone know where you are going. It might save your life someday. And to the men in the pickup truck, let's never meet again. I did call the cops about the missing female in the truck I saw. They said that they would investigate into it. So far, I haven't heard anything. Also, I realize that hiking alone, especially as a female, is a dangerous pastime, and I do realize again how foolish and naive I was being. But I have learned and plan not on hiking alone anymore. This happened a few nights ago. I'm a 25-year-old female, 15 pounds, and I was out with my thoroughbred, Shane, doing fitness work on the cross-country course, and we were getting ready to head in from an evening of hard work. It wasn't dark, but was slowly getting there, prompting me to head in for the day. As we were walking around the area we had been working, my horse started refusing to go near a patch of woods. We had gone by it several times that evening, so I urged him forward to investigate. It was then that I heard what I believed to be a human voice. I realized somebody had been watching us the entire time. This property is on 700 acres, and this section was nowhere near a road, so this person had very intentionally made their way very close to where a rider could potentially be. I did not want to startle the horse, so I calmly turned him around and began a fast walk around that patch of woods, giving it a very wide berth, heading straight back to the main barn. As I got to the middle of the field, however, Shane halted, and although by then it was almost dark, I realized something. There were people in the woods across the field in front of me too, which is where my safest exit was located. So now I have somebody in the woods 50 yards or so behind me, and what sounded like multiple people in the woods 50 yards or so in front of me. I briefly considered taking the other exit route, but as I mentioned before, this was very far off the road, so my immediate thought process was that they did not walk there. Yeah, Shane and I could have beat them to the gate, but if they had a vehicle or some sort, they could have caught up as I was opening it. We stood there for 30 seconds and simultaneously came to the conclusion, if we go now, we will beat them. We basically bolted across the field slowed down slightly to cross a ditch in the woods, and flew through the gate just beyond it. I jumped off, unlatched the gate, and did not even stop to mount the horse. I just grabbed his reins, and together we bolted to the barn. Within 20 yards or so, we were hearing distance and started hollering, "There's people out there at the entrance gates, guys, come here." As soon as I started making a fuss, a four-wheeler started up from just behind the gate and hauled ass away. A police report was made, and the next day there was evidence found of 2 four-wheelers, so that makes sense since I was seeing people basically surrounding me. We aren't going to stop riding out there, but the barn owners are taking some precautions, and we won't be out there alone or at night anymore for a while. They may have just been teenagers looking to scare a rider, but either way, not cool. And the fact that they were trying to sneakily block my exit route, I can't imagine intentions were pure. Thank God for my hypersensitive horse. Without him forcing me to pay attention, I might have never noticed the people, especially the ones in front of me moving in the woods. Shane was a good boy that day. So this is the story of a bunch of dumb teenagers who were tormented in the deep woods. A long back story, but worth it. I was an 18-year-old high school senior and was about 3/4 of the way through the year. I had moved that year and switched to a school about 30 minutes away from where I used to go. I stayed in touch with a few people from my old school and got invited to go camping with a few of them over Memorial Weekend, which basically meant getting drunk as hell in the forest. I invited 2 girls and 1 guy from my new school to come hang out for a night and meet them in the closest town from the campsite about 40 minutes away. The guy, Jeremy, hopped in my car and the girls followed me up, and we got to the campsite without incident. This campsite was 30 minutes away from any human signs of life outside of a shitty dirt road. The night started off fine with everyone getting completely trashed and me beating one of the girls I brought named Sarah at beer pong. And she was very drunk and all over me. I guess to the 18-year-old version of me, that night could not have been going better at that point. At about 12:30, things started to die down as half of us had already puked and were headed in for the night, and I was much too drunk to even try and mess with Sarah. A lot of the night is still a blur, but I remember climbing into a tent, and there were 5 of us in it, 3 guys and 2 girls. At around 2:30 a.m., I was awakened by the sound of a shotgun. I was very drunk and had a hard time processing anything. But in my drunken state, I figured it was one of the people I was camping with being an ass. One of the guys, Brent, had stayed sober the entire night and had brought his shotgun up with him, so I figured it was him being a prick to everyone who was drunk. I checked my phone and go back to sleep. I fell asleep in what I think was around 3 a.m. I was awoken by someone bawling their eyes out, and I am still having a hard time processing anything. About 5 minutes later, I realize it's Brent, and I stumble out of my tent, followed by Jeremy, and I walk up and see Brent is bleeding profusely from his nose and mouth. I run over to him, stumbling the entire time. I am then hit in the head with a rock and knocked unconscious. Everything from this point forward is from Jeremy's point of view. Jeremy, to this day, is my best friend and has told me his vision of the story many times. He says I passed out by a tree and a large man lunges out and smashes my face with a rock. After hitting me, the man lunges at Jeremy and tackles him straight on his ass. Jeremy at the time was 5'8", 140 pounds, and describes the man as at least 6'4", 280 pounds. Jeremy is being choked to death by this wooden monster of a man, and he hears another gunshot from a pistol. Sarah had managed to find a pistol Brent had also brought with him and fired a shot, missing the man by a large amount, but it managed to startle him and he sprinted off into the woods. Jeremy drove me and Brent to the hospital. I had 3 broken teeth and a severe concussion, and Brent had part of his tongue mutilated with a knife, and a broken nose. Brent has never talked to me or any of my friends from that trip about what exactly happened when he was outright alone with the man and refused to give the police much of a description. The man was never caught, and I have never been in the deep forest again. So cozy woodlands, man, let's not meet ever again. This is possibly one of the weirdest things to ever happen to me, and a throwaway seems like a good idea when telling it. I just moved to London, and being a bit lonely and wanting to get into the dating scene, I tried doing the whole OkCupid thing. It was alright, and I honestly wasn't too active on it. I check on my account a few times a week and message some profiles of girls that I thought were pretty. 95% of the time my messages would go unanswered. I'd guessed it was mostly because many of my messages in retrospect were pretty uncreative and dry. One day, I was messing around looking through various profiles when I saw an extremely attractive girl and decided I had to message her. In my opinion, she was a perfect 10, not just the fact that she was a gorgeous blonde, but we liked a lot of the same music and movies. And well, I could actually send her a decent email because of all of the things we had in common. I also need to reiterate that most of her pictures were of her smoking, which definitely clouded my judgment. I should also mention that I'm a former military and Afghan veteran, so nothing really scares me. Almost immediately after pressing send, she responded. We messaged each other through the OkCupid messenger service for about a week, and I got to learn a lot about her. Her name was Aoife, and she was from Belfast. She told me she had a daughter named Rosen, which didn't really bother me, and had a very long, complicated story about how she grew up a Catholic in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and was an orphan at a young age. She seemed really driven and had such an amazing story. I had so many questions, and in all reality, a lot of respect for her, so it was really easy to keep talking to her. Within about another week, we started talking on the phone, and then sometimes on Skype. She'd never do an actual video chat, which at the time I didn't think was too weird, but she'd send me pictures of her and her daughter, friends, etc. For the most part, this whole thing seemed legit. The stories she had were pretty detailed, and she was talking about stuff that I really didn't know a lot about, and honestly couldn't comprehend. Then there were parts of the story that seemed to get kinda weird and didn't add up. At first, she told me she was a hairstylist at some swank place in central London. I don't really frequent central a lot, so okay, no biggie. I just met her online. I wasn't going to head into central to stalk her at work. Then she said that she owned a bar in Camden called the Lock Tavern, which I looked up on the internet and is a real place, and managed it on weekends. She had detailed stories about the bouncers and regulars, etc. This didn't seem to make a lot of sense, but okay. I mean, I guess you could do both jobs and be a full-time mom. It seemed odd, but she seemed driven, and she also seemed really hot, so who was I to judge? Again, I wasn't going to be super creeper and pop down there. I just took her word for it. She also said she lived in a really nice penthouse near Covent Garden, which, if anyone knows the London real estate market, didn't seem plausible on a hairdresser barmaid's wages. She explained this by saying that she had fallen into some money after the Troubles. It seems kind of far-fetched, but again, without actually meeting her, who am I to judge? I started to notice some other weird things. She'd send me pictures, and in some of them, certain tattoos were present, and some they weren't. I figured she was just sending old pictures, but I remember that is what started to tip me off. The things were fishy to say the least, but again, there's really nothing wrong with sending old pictures, and I had no real reason not to believe the photos were of Aoife. They all seemed like the same girl, and without the exception of the tattoos and some small changes in hair color, nothing really seemed out of the ordinary. She would also send pictures of her daughter, Rosa, whom she claimed was 14. Finally, after talking to Aoife for a few weeks online, I asked her out on a date. I figured it was time I finally meet her. We were set to meet up on a Friday night, and on that Friday night she doesn't respond to a single text or call. I had nowhere to meet her. By around 9 p.m., she texts saying things got out of control at her pub, and she was really sorry, but she had to cancel. I was upset and should have bailed there, but I forgave her, and we agreed to set up another first meeting. Things from here really started to get weird. As I said, I was doing the online dating thing, and in this time, I'd met a few other girls. Another girl named Jo had asked me out, who turned out to be a psychopath, but that's just because she had an uncontrollable temper, and is nothing interesting enough to put on here. I went out with Jo one night in an area of London called Shoreditch, which isn't too far from where Aoife's pub was. While I was out, Aoife called and texted me a few times. I basically just ignored the calls. When the date was over, I said bye to Jo and went home and called Aoife. She asked where I was, and basically, well, I lied. I said I was out with a friend. Aoife didn't say anything, and we talked on the phone for a bit, and then said goodnight. The situation got strange a few nights later when Aoife caught me in a lie. She claimed to know that I was out with another girl. She knew which restaurant I was at and the night that I had been there. She knew what Jo had looked like. Aoife claimed that one of the bouncers from her pub knew what I looked like because she had shown photos of me to him, and he recognized me when I came through the doors at the restaurant in Shoreditch. This got odd. This was odd, to say the least. I basically told Aoife that the date was set up before I'd ever met her, and that we weren't really dating. She had no right to be upset, plus she'd stood me up. If anyone should be mad, it's me. To be honest, I forgot what really happened in this part of the story. I think we fought for a little bit, didn't talk for a few weeks. Then one night she called me really late. It seemed off, so I answered. She was panicking. From what I could tell, she was suffering from sleep paralysis, which I know is scary, so I stayed on the phone with her until she went back to sleep. This happened a few more times. I really had no intention to date or even see her. I went home to the US for about a month, and while I did, kept limited contact. There was nothing too serious, and my expectations were pretty low. After I'd gotten back to London, she invited me out. I don't remember much of the details, but she ended up canceling on me. I basically decided fuck it. I wasn't even upset. We had texted a little bit, but the communications really started to die down. I really didn't think much about it, and went on with my life. Then one night, I entered the Twilight Zone. One day, I was in the King's Cross, St. Pancras area with a friend of mine from the States. He had to make a meeting nearby, so I was by myself in the area. That's when I got a text from Aoife. She asked me if I wanted to meet up, and I figured, hell, might as well finally meet this girl. I was in the same area of town, 2 stops away, and I didn't see any harm in it. She told me to meet her up in Camden, and she'd be in the Weatherspoons pub at noon. It wasn't a date, and at this point, I was really curious as to who she was. I'd literally spent hours talking and texting to this girl, so I don't know Camden that well, and I'm getting texts from her on the way up. As I'm trying to find the Weatherspoons, she's telling me she's at work and in the process of selling her share in the bar, but she's on her way. Another friend of hers is at the bar, but he's a great guy. You'll like him again. I was already there. Might as well meet her friend. Then I meet Reese. Reese was a tall, skinny ginger kid. He was about 21 and had a thick Irish accent. I walked up to him, shook his hand, and we got drinks. He seemed nice enough, and for as weird as the situation could potentially be, it wasn't all that uncomfortable. Another one of his friends was there as well. They seemed like two nerds in their early 20s. They talked about football and video games and all the other stuff 20-something-year-old kids talk about, mixed in with a little bit of politics and a couple of random questions about how do you know Aoife, etc. I'd been in Afghanistan fighting the Taliban a few years prior. The situation wasn't anything to be concerned about. Then I got a text from Aoife, something along the lines of, "Hey, getting tied up. Be there in about an hour." Reese seemed nice enough, so we hung out for a few more beers and we moved to the next pub. Still no Aoife. Reese and his friend was nice. We did rounds, and fortunately, I hold my beer pretty well. Another apologetic text from Aoife rolls in. "Fuck it, we're drinking," I thought, and we're having a good time. Reese would ask me random questions about Aoife, but basically I shrugged it off. Being one of the only few things we had in common, we bar hopped around London for a bit. At one point, I was in the queue to buy a round of drinks and felt like this guy was way too close to me. I turned around and saw an overweight old man with an ugly brown jacket and a pockmarked face. He had a crucifix tattooed on his neck. In all honesty, a typical barfly you'd see in a British pub. I'd say excuse me and walk past him. We'd continue to drink and bullshit the day away. By this time, it was like 2 or 3 o'clock and Aoife is nearing 3 hours late. I decide, fuck it, let's go to the Lock Tavern. Reese and his friend seemed cool with it. We get there, and there's 2 Irish tricolors flying above the place. "Yeah, you can tell Aoife owns the place, huh?" Reese said. The part of the story kinda added up. We went into her place. I text her to tell her we're there. "Oh great, I'm almost done with this. I'll be down in a minute." She never comes down. But this is when the story gets really, really weird. This other dude named Pete shows up, shakes Reese's hand, and Reese says, "Oh, you're here to meet Eva." I look at Reese, and he's like, this must seem weird. Eva is Aoife's best friend. Now, this seemed really weird, but I needed to figure out what was going on. These 2 girls have almost exactly the same name. I had never heard Aoife mention Eva before. I start talking to Pete, and Reese starts asking similar questions to him about Aoife that he was asking me about Aoife. But some of these questions were getting more serious. He was asking him things like, "Do you love her?" Pete's story then starts to sound eerily similar to mine. Pete meets Eva online. She's from Northern Ireland, has a daughter named Rosa. In his version, she's 12. He'd tried to meet up with her a few times, but it fell through. He was invited last minute to hang out today. "Oh shit, this is weird," is all I could think. Something wasn't right. At this point, I knew that someone was getting played, probably me, and I was in some kind of game, but I needed to figure out what exactly was going on. Pete and I started to figure out things right about the same time. Right in front of Reese, who stuck his guns on the story remarkably well, They both have similar names. They both have daughters that are around the same age, with a really common Irish name. I'm not buying it, neither is Pete. I decide that the pub we are in might not be friendly territory, and I don't want to get shanghaied in Camden. So I suggest we leave. Eva sends me a text saying she's almost on her way down. Great, I said. Meets up with us in the street at some other pub. Pete and I start walking out. On the way out, I ask the bartender, "Hey, is Aoife working today?" He responds, "No, mate. Aoife hasn't worked here in 3 years." At this point, I know something really, really creepy is going on. We head to the next pub. I've got a good buzz going on, but I know I need to sober the fuck up fast. I think Pete might be a victim in this game too, but he might not be. He for sure can't be trusted. Reese and his buddy are suspect as well, but I don't have any proof yet, and my curiosity is keeping me there. We walk into another pub. Reese's friend says something to Reese, and I don't hear it. Neither does Pete. Reese loses it. He yells at his friend, and his friend basically says, "Fuck you, I'm out," and takes off. Pete and I are still trying to put things together. I find a table on an outdoor deck. It's quiet. I can think, and I can piece this together. It's amazing how fast you can sober up when you think you are in trouble. I ask Pete if he has any pictures of Eva, and Pete pulls out his phone. He shows me a picture that I'd seen before. "Wait, that's Rosa, Aoife's daughter." "No, mate, that's Aoife," Pete replies. This is making no sense. I'd been sent the same pictures of the same girl and been told it was Aoife's 14-year-old daughter. I showed Pete pictures that I had of Aoife. He claimed he'd never seen the girl in the photos before. Reese was sticking to the story that I had pictures of Aoife and Pete had pictures of Aoife, and that he wasn't sure why I thought the pic of Rosa. He also kept claiming that Aoife and Aoife texted him and they were on their way. That's when it dawned on me. I simply looked at Pete and asked him, "What number do you have in your phone for Eva?" Pete reads the number on his phone, and it turns out being the exact same number I had for Aoife in my phone. If all the other clues hadn't added up, this one sent it over the edge. It also sent Pete out of the bar as he literally jumped over a table and ran out the door in a panic. At this point, it was just me and Reese. I don't think that he had overheard that we both had the same number for someone that he was telling me were two separate girls. Reese said that Eva and Aoife had texted him and that they were on their way. I don't know who Aoife and Eva are at this point, or if they even exist. I basically tell Reese that I think he's playing some kind of fucked up game, and that he's more than suspect of wrongdoing. He took offense to this and physically threatened me. He wasn't a big dude and knew if he stepped to me, it wasn't going to end well. I basically walked right through him, knocking him into the door frame, and tore out of the bar. I headed straight for the tube. I needed to jump on the Northern Line and get home. I wasn't waiting for anything. At this point, I have no idea what the fuck is going on. At best, I'd been caught up in some weird fucking catfish scam. At worst, I was almost a victim of a snuff movie. I get on the tube and there's a guy right behind me. I look at him. He's overweight, pock-marked face, brown jacket. We make eye contact. I look up at his neck and there's the crucifix tattoo. It's the same guy from earlier. I'm a bit worried, but I've been under worse pressure before in my life. I calmly sat down on the train. The train was being held in Camden for some reason and wasn't moving. That's when who jumps out of the same carriage as the two of us? Reese. I could have sworn he made eye contact and gave a nod to the man in the brown jacket. At this point, I played dumb that they were there. On the London Tube, there's a certain dinging noise that's made right before the doors close. I waited to hear that noise and then bolted out of the door. I ran around and doubled back on the tube several times. When I finally got back home, I texted a friend in New Cross and told her I was scared I was being followed. She was having a party that night and invited me over. I really didn't want to head home alone. At this point, I think I doubled back and switched lines enough that if Reese and the man in the brown coat were following me, I had lost them. I made it to New Cross safe and sound. I had a few calls from Aoife the next few days, but never wanted to answer them. She also sent a few texts saying we needed to talk. Eventually, she stopped calling and texting altogether. I have a few theories on the whole issue. One of my friends thinks that Reese and Aoife are the same person. I wouldn't rule it out, but the person I talked to on the phone definitely sounded like a woman. One night in November of 2017, when I was 22 years old, my mom and I went grocery shopping. While standing in the bakery section, my mom and I ran into my aunt, and the three of us stood there and chit-chatted for a while. I had been feeling generally uneasy around this time because I had recently been watching a lot of YouTube videos about true crime and creepy encounters. I was having trouble sleeping and had been getting scared when I was home alone and heard the tiniest noises. Due to this uneasiness or paranoia, I guess, I was very alert and on edge at the bakery at my grocery store. I stood there with my back to the bagels and kept an eye on everyone walking around past us as my mom and aunt shared stories. Nobody seemed suspicious until I caught the eye of a prematurely balding man. He looked like your average mid-30s brony neckbeard nice guy. I remember thinking to myself, God, he's kinda creepy looking, isn't he? As he walked through the produce section into the bakery, but then I started to feel bad. Chill out, you're being way too judgmental, I told myself, going so far as to even smile at him out of sheer guilt. He's probably staring at you because you're staring at him. He's just glancing on his way by. He's going to forget about you the second he takes his eyes off of you, right? Wrong. I completely forgot about this experience for a few blissfully ignorant months. Then in January, I received a messenger request from an old friend I'd like to touch with. My long-lost friend was the first of many to reach out, saying that there was a lot of buzz on Facebook about a local sex offender who had been taking pictures of young women with hair he deemed pretty, some in their 20s, like me, some well below the age of 18, and posting them on a picture-sharing site. I don't know exactly how, but his online albums stocked with, and I am not exaggerating, thousands of these pictures had been found, and a bunch of screenshots were being plastered all over Facebook to raise awareness. My old friend saw a few pictures of me standing against the bagels, flanked by my mother and my aunt, my long hair hanging down, and my post-French braid waves. I felt sick to my stomach when I saw the screenshots. I told my family about what I just found out, and my brother immediately called the police to report it. As he was talking to an officer, I received more screenshots, this time of the creep's sex offender registry page. It was the man from the grocery store, the man I was initially unnerved by, the man I felt guilty about, the man I smiled at. When my brother got off the phone with the police, he told us that they had been flooded with reports all night. While sympathetic, the policeman my brother spoke to said there was nothing they could do as the creep was legally within his rights to take those pictures of us out in public. The man was allegedly assaulted outside of a convenience store the night his pictures were discovered. Before he even realized it, he had been exposed, and he has since been arrested for possession of child pornography and an unrelated case. My brother had actually been aware of this guy long before, as he was apparently infamous on the net for being a sketchy white dude who was obsessed with Asian women, had a hair fetish, and oh yeah, was a convicted sex offender. So as they say, creepy photographer, let's not meet again. So I just started my first job. It's a fry cook job at a royal fast food chain in America. My first days started off fantastic until I met my male manager. At first he seemed nice, way better than the female manager. He laughed and joked around with me and the other employees and generally made me feel pretty comfortable at a new place. Fast forward a few hours after meeting him, and shit hit the fucking fan very fast. I feel like to get the whole creepy factor, I should probably first describe what this guy looks like. He's tall and greasy, fat, has glasses, pimply, grayish black buzz cut, has glasses. He looks like a total neckbeard. He also talks like Renee from Storage Wars. Okay, so I'm getting off topic again, but I digress. This manager is a creepy dude. My first shift with him started off swell, like I said, but after the main manager left, It started off innocent enough. He asked if I liked mini golf. I wanted to be polite, and I told him yes. Then he proceeds to ask me to go mini golfing with him like 4 times. I'm a minor, and I told him I don't think my parents would be very comfortable with that. His response, "We can just tell them that Sarah, the female manager, is coming too." I brushed this off because maybe the guy is just lonely. No biggie, right? Wrong. The next day, another woman, Hannah, was training me. She's about 50 and very sweet. I was making the sandwiches pretty quickly, and she was excited. She said that I was doing a great job, and that she hoped I'd stay around for a while because I was making her day brighter. Then the manager came around and says, "I hope you stay too. We need more cute girls around here." I quickly excused myself to go to the ladies' room to text my boyfriend and tell him what had just happened. Within 5 minutes, he was at the store. He asked to speak with the manager and explained to them that one of his friends, me, was being treated inappropriately by a male manager. The creeper then comes out to the back where all of us were, standing and talking, and begins to flip shit. He goes into full-on rage mode, saying shit like, "If anyone thinks I'm trying to steal their fucking girlfriend, I have a fucking fiancé." Then starts showing us pictures of some random girl who is clearly not his fiancé. I clocked out and went home. I wasn't too scared since my boyfriend made sure they knew someone was having a problem. I figured if anything happened I could tell him and he would solve it. The next day I went into work. Same boring shit. Creepy manager showed up halfway through. It got slow and we were all bullshitting again, and he came into the back and joined our conversation. I was talking about my boyfriend with Hannah, and she was laughing and calling me cute for blushing when I was talking about him. The manager then says, "Teal hair? Don't care. You should really smile more. Makes you look even cuter than you usually do. You look so innocent." I walked into the back to get on my phone. I come back, and the manager is standing there. "So, how old are you?" Stupid me answers, 17, but I'll be 18 in like a month."
I hope you're still here in a month. We can go out and do something for your birthday.
At this point, I tried to walk away, but now he was blocking my path. Luckily, Hannah called me, and he moved. The entire day, I work until close. I could feel his beady eyes staring at me. When I went outside with another worker so he could have a smoke break and I could get away from the creep, he walked over with his phone. On the screen was a picture of an Asian porn star in a schoolgirl outfit.
This is the kind of girl I'm into,
he said. I tried to shuffle away slowly, but once again he was blocking my path. The guy who was outside noticed I was uncomfortable and stepped in between us and said,
"Bruh, she's not even hot. Plus, she's got fake tits."
I tried to get away again, but it didn't work. The manager then said something that makes my skin crawl, even to think about.
Yeah, but it's the face, the innocence. Something about taking advantage of someone just does something for me.
I would like to say that I noped the fuck out, quit, called the owner, anything that might have even been a little bit useful, but I didn't. I finished my shift, listened to this dude talk about all the sex he had when he was my age and how I shouldn't stay with one person for too long. I need to mix it up a bit or else I'll get bored. On my way home, I almost cried. I felt so disgusting. I went in and the next day hoping to speak with a different manager about him, but he was the only one there. I uncomfortably worked my shift while trying to avoid him as much as possible. Eventually, he managed to corner me again, this time asking me about the ring on my thumb and my boyfriend. Somehow the conversation topic changed to the future, and if I ever planned on getting married. Obviously, I said yes to try to deter him, but he pressed on. I told him, maybe I'll end up with a woman, you never know. He then began to flip shit again. He said,
"Don't ever end up being a lesbian. That's horrible. At least be bisexual. That way guys can have a little bit of fun too. Don't be selfish."
I rolled my eyes and walked away. Later on, the other worker went on break. During breaks, we aren't supposed to stay in the store, so I guess he left or whatever. But I was alone with the creep, and I started cleaning so that when 11 came, I'd go home faster. He then tried to have a conversation with me about what fun I thought was okay at my age. I quickly told him about how I was waiting until marriage because I have too much to focus on right now with college and stuff. He said,
"Come on, a little bit of fun isn't gonna be too bad. You just need to feel pleasure. Then you'll understand."
I was too scared to do anything. So I just went into the ladies' room and felt really uncomfortable. That night, my mom was picking me up. It was 11:30, and I was waiting outside of the store for her, so I could just leave. I was waiting outside for like 2 minutes when the manager comes outside.
"Come wait inside. A pretty girl like you should not be standing out here alone."
I told him that I lived down the street and my mom would be here in a minute. He said,
"I can always drive you home. I'll never let a woman walk home. It's against my moral."
I then took out my phone and told my mom to hurry the fuck up and come ASAP. Her contact photo came up. It was a picture of us at graduation. The manager says,
"Is that your mom? She's really cute, but I still think you're cuter."
I called my mom, and of course, she didn't fucking answer.
"Are you nervous? Come here, give me a hug. I'm sure she'll be here in a minute."
I never ran so fast in my fucking life. I sprinted out the door, away from him, right as my mom showed up. Fast forward to last week, I was working till close alone with him. I texted my boyfriend about how uncomfortable I was, and he came to the store and waited in the parking lot for me. When suddenly, the creepy manager gets a text from the main manager cussing him off for not doing his count. He freaks out, throwing a tantrum like a child, yelling, kicking stuff, the whole 9 yards. I keep cleaning my shit, not wanting to get involved. He went into the freezer at 11. I did all the dishes and mopped up until about 11:40. He finally comes out of the freezer crying. I said, "Fuck this shit, dude. I'm done right now, alright?" And I clocked out. My boyfriend was still waiting outside, so I walked over to his car and kissed him and shit, when suddenly I looked up. The manager was staring at us. My boyfriend drove me to my car and urged me to quit. "So creepy, neckbeard manager, please, leave me the fuck alone." I met Jacob in my science class, but we actually started talking during a dumb assembly, and we sat together because we were both the loner types in our class. We had so much in common, and I grew to love him as a friend. We were really close. I was a very shy girl, never talked about what was going on with me mentally with anyone, but I could trust Jacob. I told him what my mother's boyfriend was doing to me, what Alex was like, and he helped me feel happy again. I told him how Alex was abusive and how I felt trapped with him. Jacob was always there when I got bruises and whatnot. Eventually, me and Alex had a fight, and I told him we were over because he only talked about sex. I felt like a weight was off of my shoulders for once. I told Jacob right away, and all he said was perfect. I thought it was a bit odd, but continued to hang out for the next few days. He suddenly asked me out, and I told him, "Jacob, no, I just got out of a relationship that really fucked me up. I can't handle that right now." He seemed very upset, but understood, so I thought. I come into my science class early to see Jacob crying with the teacher for some reason. She was a great teacher, always helped people struggling. She looked at me and waved me over. "Hey, I know you guys are besties. What's going on?" I have no idea. "Jacob says you don't want to be friends with him anymore. Did something happen?" I never said that. He asked me out and I said no, I want to be friends. "Oh, I'm sorry. But Jacob, can't you forgive your bestie? You guys have been so close. You don't want to throw that away, huh?" He just never responded and didn't show for school for like a week. I was worried and just told him I was here for him and didn't mean to upset him. He came back and it's like he was a different person. He had a huge scar on his neck, like he had been choked or something, and big scars on his wrists. I immediately started bawling my eyes out and hugged him, asking what happened.
"You don't love me, so I punished myself."
I dropped to the floor, crying, by my locker. I didn't know what to do. I loved my best friend, but I didn't want to date him. I just stayed by his side at all times. I tried to make him happy, like I used to. Nothing. He told me if I wanted to help, I'd have to kiss him better, and I just couldn't do that. Day after day, he told me how it's my fault he's depressed and hurting himself. So after a while, I started cutting, and because I was dealing with eating disorders, this didn't help. I just stopped eating for 2 months, where most of the time I'd switched to bulimia. I was so pale, my rib cage started showing a bit, and I looked unhealthy to the point my teacher got the school involved. I told them everything. I told them how I didn't want to lose Jacob, and I didn't want him to die because I didn't want to date him. and then he stopped coming to school. A month, and he was nowhere. I thought he was in the hospital or something. I asked my teacher if she knew if he was okay. She told me they sent him to a different school and that he wasn't allowed to talk to me or see me because he threatened other kids who I was close with that he would hurt me if they talked to me, and those kids told the school. A few months later, I finally started to try and get better after we moved back to my old town. I get a friend request. The profile picture is something like in a horror film. It's Jacob with bloody bandages on his face revealing only one eye, and under the name of Gregory Black. I did not accept it, but got some creepy messages about how I'm not smart and that I make him go crazy, and how his mother threw him into a psych ward or something and he finally got out. I have no idea if anything he said was true, but honestly, I got fed up with him. I didn't care about him being my old bestie. He was awful, he needed help, and he refused it. I blocked him, and I haven't heard from him since. So Jacob, let's not meet again. Now I'm healthy, I eat 3 meals a day, and I'm sober. I still have anxiety and depression, but I plan on getting help, and though I wish no harm on him, I really do hope he gets the help he needs. Know your worth and know when you need to leave. This leads into why I was so messed up with the neckbeard story. Even with all of this bad shit that happened to me, I don't look for sympathy. I only hope that if you are struggling to get help or leave a situation before it messes you up. I definitely learned a lot through my experiences, and I am proud of who I am today. Don't be afraid to ask for help, or to tell your family or anyone you can trust to get out of a bad place. So, I was a college student back in 2009, 2010, I can't remember the exact year. Anyway, I was introduced to a friend of an acquaintance while in the cafeteria one day. The guy was skinny, dark-skinned, wore glasses, and kinda looked like a nerd in a pretentious, rich gangster kinda way. He usually wore button-down, short-sleeved shirts tucked into his pants with a belt. You'd probably have to meet him to get the image. The first thing he does after introducing himself to me and chatting a bit about random things, such as our goals for the future, if I remember right, is try to inundate me with all kinds of information about the Jewish Torah and how all religion is basically fake. He told me all about how the Bible and other religious books were bastardizations of this and how the definitions changed the meaning of everything, mostly about the different names for God or the Lord and how it pertained to different entities. I found him interesting, but at the time I was in an atheistic phase and wasn't all that interested, but it rubbed me wrong for some reason I couldn't explain, almost like cognitive dissonance. Also, I forgot to mention that the very first thing he did was introduce himself under a false name from a nation, Judea, or something very similar. We exchanged numbers and talked. One of the first things I noticed about this guy was how controlling and kind of manipulative he was. He would say things like,
If you want to be friends, you've got to be this sort of way.
or
You can't eat certain foods because our way of life forbids it.
he really wanted me on board with his religious thing for some reason. He would offer advice and help about things too, like romantic problems. He would end up being the first person I ever truly got drunk with, which was ironically a fun time. One of the things I learned very early on about this guy was that when he wasn't harping on about religious rules and stuff like that, that was that he was one of the funniest people I ever knew. He knew how to party, how to socially connect to people, and some conversations we had were very interesting, so we became the kind of friends that talk on the phone often. But one of the other things I noticed about him was he had this very creepy Jim Jones, Charles Manson kind of ability to make people listen to him and believe the things he told them. It was also very unsettling. I was well aware of his propensity towards manipulation quite early on, but for some reason I felt obligated to hang out with him until, of course, it became a sort of friendship, my strangest friendship ever. Another creepy thing about him is that he would show up when I'd least expect or want him to. I would turn my head and he'd be there. I was always super careful not to talk about him very loudly because he would do this quite often. Once when I was walking with my mom and really did not want to introduce them, but had to anyway. By then I already knew he was a psychopath and a narcissist. He had no empathy for anyone at all and would stroke his own ego all day long. He was incredibly vain too and took all kinds of useless supplements for no real apparent reason. When we were on the phone, he would tell me things about how the different names for God aforementioned were actually about aliens. He said humans were designed to mine gold because it would make the aliens immortal. The story he would try to sell me on would change many things over the course of our friendship, depending on what he was into. It would go from Jewish to Jamaican, then to Egyptian, then to something else I can't remember. Sometimes it would have elements of spirituality in it, and other times he would say that after we died, that's it. He'd talk about how beings lived in the sun and under the moon, and how light was fake and only dark light existed. Then he'd talk about how I should put together all of my college loan money with his so he could buy a house near the beach and we would live it up down there. Like I'd fall for that. Anyway, we meet these girls and he wanted to show me how easy college girls are. So he starts chatting up this girl and her friend who happens to be lesbian. Their relationship is short-lived, and it's mostly because she said he had a temper and was too controlling. She's the one who told me his real name because she saw his ID card. So this guy gets the idea that he wants to kill her and her friend for humiliating him. Apparently the ex-friend mocked him or something. He said, "We don't let people do things like that to us and get away with it." So he started shopping around for poisons, a gun, and a knife, anything to try to get his revenge. He talked other people into helping him get these things too. So I see that this is getting out of hand, and the girl is a very nice girl, so I do the only thing I can do and tell security. But I tell them to keep me anonymous because this guy is fucking crazy and has said many things about wanting to be a gangster and wanting to kill people. Well, those fucking idiot security guards fucked that up, and he ends up finding out about it. I find out from a mutual friend at some point that this guy wanted to kill me. He plans to do so, but it seemed like some people either didn't come through for him or those friends weren't that into the idea. Anyway, we sort of pseudo-bury the hatchet, although he did tell me many times that he could kill me himself. But he wouldn't do that because I'm one of his one and only true friends. I don't doubt that he would try to do it. I told him I was manipulated into telling on him. Long story. As you can tell, this story needed to be any longer, and I'm trying to just give highlights and context. The things he said kept getting crazier and crazier, and if you tried to disagree with him, he would just get argumentative with tons of false facts or continue on. Some people actually bought this shit and were kind of like disciples to him, but I just couldn't get behind blatant lies that a sociopath made up. At a later point, we decided to go to a beach town to hang out and get drunk and have some fun. Yes, I was tempting fate, but back then I didn't care so much about my life, and I really needed to get out and break free from being a shut-in that never did anything. So me, him, 2 other friends went to this awesome college beach party town. It's only important to mention this because one of the friends he invited along was a guy with social issues that he didn't actually know. The guy just had money, and the other guy had a car. He used these guys as a means to an end. They weren't his friends. To my surprise, at one point the guy with the car strands us in the middle of the night when the whole town goes dead. Our cell phones died, and a drug dealer was the only hope for a ride we could get. So the dealer requests we hold something for him in exchange for a ride while he goes to get his granny's car. Charles makes me put it in my pocket after a bit. Looking back, the guy was doing everything he could to make me look more suspicious. He had me wait in an alley. I can't remember why exactly. He said it was out of sight, but the dealer came back and said that what he was doing was fucked up and that I stuck out over there in that sort of shadowy area. Looking back, if a cop would have drove by, they would have detained me on the spot, then taken the drugs off of my person and arrested me. Eventually, we leave and Charles decides that we should just keep the stuff the dealer handed him because he never came back anyway. So we were waiting by the gas station, and this guy literally goes up to a fucking police officer to ask for a ride. By this time, he had taken the stuff back and forced the other guy to hold on to it, but he had assumed that the socially awkward guy gave it back to me by then. I am sure that he was trying to get me in trouble at that point. Anyway, after we made it back, things went back to how they usually go. If I haven't mentioned it, Charles was a womanizer. He didn't care who it was. He'd go for her. He'd get with a woman that he thought would be impossible for anyone at all to get with, like married teachers and devout churchgoers who were in committed relationships, but he also didn't seem to have standards. He just liked to ruin people's relationships and their lives. It kind of shattered my illusions of people at the time because it showed me that everyone could be manipulated into doing things and that identity and personality didn't mean anything. I'm not sure, but I might have been depressed for a long time after that. Anyway, there was this girl who was a pastor's daughter, sort of pretty. She kept to herself mostly. Charles decided to go out with her at some point, and she entered this rebellious phase where she was sleeping around with everyone. She also didn't bathe or take care of herself. Apparently Charles was her first. When I asked her if that was true, she proceeded to tell me horror stories about how he was manipulative and abusive towards her, and one time, during a fight while they were walking back to campus, he tried to push her into traffic. This was told to me during a period of time he had left and gone somewhere for an internship. Thankfully, I thought, because I wasn't likely to see him again, at least not for a long time. I was wrong. He came back when I least expected it, and he was just as fucked up as ever. I told him I thought a girl liked me once and expressed a desire to get with her, just random conversation that I didn't think would go anywhere. I just needed to work up the nerve and do it. Upon hearing this, he goes over to her. They talk. Next thing I know, they are in a relationship. This relationship lasts a few weeks, and for some reason, he's told her and everyone else that I'm his cousin. Suddenly they break up, and she's avoiding both him and me. I try to explain that I'm not like him, and that she doesn't need to be afraid of me, but she absolutely refuses to be around me. If I sit at the table that all of our friends are at, except Charles, she gets up and leaves. Someone asks her about it, and she told them that it was because Charles was my cousin, and that he did horrible things to her when they were together. This scumbag did that stuff just because I liked her, and in a way, it was my fault. Anyway, a few years later, 2012 or something, I have a new circle of friends. A guy named Ricky, another named Mike, and a girl named Karen. Ricky had a huge crush on Karen, but we all got along with just fine. One day, Charles just shows up and tries to get Ricky to join us in our adventures, or what the fuck ever. I'm really just trying to find any excuse to distance myself at this point, but I guess at this junction in my life, I'm still way too shy to tell people off, or not to be afraid to speak up. Anyway, this idiot has some plan to form our own gang or something, and one day he's trying to three-way call us. I badly wanted to tell Ricky that giving him his number was a terrible idea, but I didn't want to get shot or stabbed or anything. I didn't pick up the phone, and apparently they had a conversation. Later on, I found out that during their few weeks of friendship, Charles was trying to get Ricky into a plan to lure me into some trap and kill me. He had sold Ricky a lie originally that I liked Karen and Ricky didn't seem to mind, and said that he would step down, so Charles started spinning other lies. Ricky didn't go for any of it in the end, and we talked and had a long, healthy conversation about it. Ricky is still a good friend to this day. Eventually, Charles left, and the last I heard from him was some voicemail from 2015 or something. Hands down the creepiest person I've ever met, befriended, made an enemy of, and then had to play cool with for years on end, just not to get killed or worse. He never did admit his real name to me. He always introduced himself under false names to strangers too. Charles, let's not ever fucking meet again. For some context, this took place in June 2018, about 2 weeks before I turned 18. I'm female, and had just finished my A-levels and decided to join Tinder for a joke, just to have a bit of fun and waste time. I thought it would be fun to put my Snapchat in my bio, just to see how many people added me, and I admit I enjoy the attention from guys. People added me, but no one actually messaged me except one guy. I'll keep his name anonymous. This guy was 20, I was 17 at the time, and was about an hour drive away from me. This is important later. We started off just innocently chatting. The conversation was dry, but it killed boredom, so I held the conversation. One day, he randomly popped up asking me, "So, when are we gonna meet then?" I was hesitant at first, but I agreed. In the end, after I ran it over my parents, I invited him over to my house. I don't know what I was thinking, but I told him he could come over. He got there the next day at 9 a.m., bearing in mind he lived an hour away from me. First red flag. I was confused as hell and wasn't even dressed for the day. Nevertheless, I invited him in and finished getting ready. We just chilled and watched films all day before I headed off. Around 2 p.m., we chilled by the beach for a bit before coming back to the house at 5 p.m. I was expecting him to go home after that, but no, he stayed. We watched a couple more films, and every now and then I would look over to him and catch him flat out staring at me. He would lock eyes and would say something creepy like, "I love your eyes," or "I'm so glad I have met you," all while knowing me for all of 8 hours. I regret to say we ended up kissing. A lot I felt awkward in being a naive 17-year-old on her first real date. I thought that was what you were supposed to do. He left at around 10 p.m. He was at my house for 13 hours, but there were no sparks at my end. I was only expecting this to be a one-time thing. Nope, he turned up at 9 a.m. again, like 2 days later. I went along with it because I had nothing better to do. Didn't leave again until 9 p.m. At this point, I had no interest in seeing him again and didn't really feel a romantic connection with him. I will admit, I may have led him on, as I never actually told him I wasn't interested. Looking back now, I should have told him, and maybe the next event wouldn't have happened. My birthday rolls around. Well, the day before, he shows up at 9 a.m. again and takes me out. We go to the mall, and he buys me so much. I keep saying, "No, you don't have to," and "let me buy this," but he insisted because it was my birthday. I had only met this guy twice before and known him all of 5 minutes, and he was buying me so much stuff like clothes, makeup, and, sexy underwear. I was still only 17. Even though my birthday was the next day, I felt like I was being treated like a prostitute. Every time we walked around, he would force my hand into his and try and kiss me. I felt so awkward. Anyway, we would get back to my house around 6 p.m. I come home to flowers from him and that he had delivered to my house. We chill in my room. I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped. I felt like I couldn't tell him to leave because he had just spent so much money on me. Anyway, he tried to have sex with me, and he kept saying, "Come on, didn't you have a nice birthday? And I came all this way for you." Just creepy stuff like that, trying to get me to sleep with him. I just kissed him and told him I didn't want to. I wasn't a virgin, but I definitely didn't want to sleep with him. He finally leaves and just break down crying. I don't know why. I just felt so trapped. I tried and be cold with him over message and stuff for the next few days, hoping to scare him off. Nope. About 3 days after my birthday, I get home from work at 9 p.m. Guess whose car I see parked outside of my fucking house? Yep. I walk in, and he's just sitting, chatting with my family in the lounge. They seem to really like him, even though I'd fucking told them how creepy he was. We ended up going to a local pub and getting drinks. We get back to my house, and I'm pretty drunk. He ordered me spirits, pretty much, even when I hadn't even asked him to buy me a drink. So I suggest more drinks and crack open a bottle of bubbly I saved from my birthday. As we are drinking more, he gets quieter. I look up at him and ask what's wrong, and he suddenly grabs me, kisses me, and tries to put his hand up my skirt. I immediately push him off and stare angrily at him. He then looks at me with a really sinister look and says, "I deserve it." Because he had alcohol, he couldn't drive me home, so he had to stay over. I tell him I'm too drunk and I just want to go to bed. Luckily, my mother happily showed him to the guest bedroom, and I didn't see him again until the morning. I woke up around 9 a.m. and walked downstairs to find him cuddling my cat in the garden. I tell him I had a call from work saying that they need me in about an hour and that he needs to leave. He tried to protest, saying that he'll wait till I'm finished and we can hang out, but I tell him no, and that I'm seeing a friend later, which wasn't a lie, but the work lie, made him leave quicker, and yet he still protests, saying we can all hang out together. Eventually, he takes no for an answer and leaves. I cry and tell my mom everything. She still likes to tell me that he wasn't that bad to this day, but she didn't have to deal with him like I did. I meet my friend and tell her all about him, and that I'm going to leave in a couple of days and tell him I don't want to see him anymore. However, that same night I get a lengthy paragraph from this guy professing his undying love to me. Some of the most memorable quotes from this are, "You were my whole world. I'd be nothing without you, and I'm so glad I have met you. I can't wait to share a life together." That was it. I had to be straight up with him. I told him everything, that I didn't feel a connection to him, and that what he did to me when he was drunk was not okay. I even offered to return the things he bought, but he said no. Surprisingly, he actually apologized and said he was sorry for making me feel uncomfortable. Brilliant. Nope. He started stalking me. Anyway, who's got Snapchat will know that you can view a map that tells you where all of your friends are. You can turn it off so people can't see you, but I customize mine so that only people I'm close with can see where I am. He was one of them. I forgot to turn it off, and whenever I went out, he was there about an hour later. Remember, he lives about an hour from me. I first noticed he had followed me after I went to the beach. Same one I went to with him, with my friend. About 2 or 3 hours into our day, we were getting ready to go home. I opened my snap maps just so that I could see that me and my friend were together and show her. When I saw who shall not be named with us, his little Bitmoji character, probably like 200 yards away from us, seen just now, my eyes widened. I told my friend that the guy I had been complaining about all day was literally here, now with us somewhere. We both panicked and sped walked to my car and drove home. This happened 2 more times, once again with the same friend, when we visited a reservoir near my town. There was no reason for him to be there, so I messaged him. I asked him what he was doing at the reservoir when I got home. He said he was taking pictures, but the reservoir would have been more like a 3-hour road trip for him to drive, and he had never mentioned photography to me before, so I did not believe in him. It happened a 3rd time, and that's when I blocked him. I was with my goddamn extended family in a restaurant, yet this time he messaged me his location on Snapchat, which is a little thing you can do. He was in the fucking building. I had to then come up with an excuse to tell all my extended family, who I haven't seen for months, why we had to leave. I told my mom the truth, and then she explained to them after. They were understanding. I'd had enough. I didn't even message him again. I blocked him on everything, and I didn't hear from him again.
In 2012, I was 12 years old. I got my first account on DeviantArt before I knew how to really draw. The only thing I knew how to do when it came to art was creepy pencil drawings with colored pencil etched into it. My first post was a drawing of a popular anime character with blue pigtails. So I drew a crappy rendition of this character, blissfully unaware that her skirt seemed to be too short in the drawing. Looking back, I was still at an immature age, so I didn't really think much of it at the time. Looking at the drawing now, it wasn't really that decent, but I didn't know that. Because I had drawn this, I saw a message on my submission where I uploaded it. In the comments of my drawing, there was someone who messaged me simply, "Hey, nice drawing," with the smiley face emoticon from the website. I was so excited because it was my first ever comment on one of my art pieces. I then looked at my profile and realized that he had watched me as well. Then I was very excited and happy. I also had my very first watcher on my account. His username was Gluten in the title. I don't remember the exact details of his name. He favorited my drawing, and I replied to his comment by simply saying, "Thanks." Here's where things got a bit weird for me. He replied, "You're welcome," like common courtesy on the website, but then followed the comment up with, "I really like how short you made the girl's skirt." Keep in mind I was only 12. I had no idea what he meant in that context, so I replied with, "It's a statement for anime girls to have short skirts," or something along those lines. He replied, "Oh, of course. Yours is my favorite." Okay, a bit of a strange reply. Before replying to him back, I dug a bit deeper into his profile, wondering if I should be nice to favorite him back. His profile stated that he was 21 years old. Yes, the site lets you display your exact age on the top front page. And it was the same for me. I legitimately put that I was 12. Did he realize how young I actually was for him to not be saying that? But like an oblivious 12-year-old, your brain doesn't quite piece things together, and you go along with whatever may cross your mind. So I friended this creepy man back. I don't remember the conversation after that, only that we kept it friendly and moved on. I would occasionally post more pictures, but he would comment only on a few of them, and usually he was nice. But then there was always some weird comment like, "I wonder how long she can sit on that," if I had the character in a certain pose, or "Can I get to taste her? Please, XD." And again, I would pay no mind to these comments because my watchers were building up to see my work, and I rarely replied to the man again. I did, however, go on his profile again after he commented something and found pictures of this elephant cartoon that I forgot the name of. He seemed to love this elephant cartoon that he was obsessed with, and everywhere on his profile I saw this cartoon and fan art of it. Then I looked more into his gallery, and there was a lot of these gray pieces with the minus sign on them, indicating that it was a not safe for work, 18 plus artwork. I didn't know this at the time either, so I tried pressing on it, wondering why it was grayed out. There then was a message that said, "Mature artwork. Must be 18 or older to view." I remember frowning at this, thinking that it wasn't fair for me to not see it. I wish I could tell you I never saw it to this day, and didn't let curiosity get the better of me. But I'd be very wrong. I made a second account claiming I was 18 just to see what type of art this guy drew because my mind was curious enough to see it. How I regretted that. He had fan art drawings relating to or hinting at illegal underage porn. There were really disturbing ones relating to the cartoon he liked, with the little girl elephant character being strangled and raped by her dad. There were pictures of anime girls looking 10 years old or possibly younger in sexual positions, getting raped by her dad. There were pictures of anime girls looking 10 years old or possibly younger in sexual positions, getting raped. There were even some more gore-fest pictures among the elephant ones I saw, and illegal porn images that he mixed with gore themes as well. Impalement, cutting out body parts with a knife, torture involving blood, hypnotism, etc. Suffice to say,
I unfriended the guy on my main account and was extremely disturbed by this. A week later, he still messaged me on my main account and said, "Why did you unfriend me?" Sad face. I felt no sympathy for him and said something along the lines of, "You are so disturbing, and you draw disgusting things." He said something to the effect of, "LOL, so are you. Let people have their own opinions, sweetheart." I then found out how to block a user on the site, so I blocked him. That gave me internal peace, but it didn't last long. A year after the entire incident, I was using the 18-year-old account as a backup account, and for different art mediums. Nobody knew this account was linked to my other one. Somehow my old friend Gluten manages to find me without telling anything about how the two accounts are related to each other. And exactly 1 year later, in the summer, he PMs me on my other account. The message said, "Hey, do you miss me, sweetie?" "I missed you since the unfriend," sad face. "That's okay." My eyes widened in horror, and I kept thinking to myself, how did this pervert find me? He must have been really experienced in computer tech or hacking, because I have no idea how that possibly could have happened, let alone a year later. I replied to him saying, "I unfriended you because you drew illegal things, and you should be banned from this website." What followed next was him trying to creepily get under my skin by role-playing with me. At this point, he was now 22, and I'm 13, still very much disturbed by him, but he only made things worse by talking to me in roleplay terms, using asterisks in everything he said. He literally said he was grabbing my bun gently, an asterisk, among other lewd comments to me, some asterisks and some without. I'm sitting there like, here we go again, obviously disturbed. So I blocked him on that backup account as well. Considering the types of things he drew, I think he definitely liked flirting with preteens on purpose, and probably got a kick out of it. For the most part, being on DeviantArt was okay for me after that, but people like him who drew lewd things like that plagued the site. He is the major reason I left it. So I know this entire encounter was online, and a lot of these experiences happen in real life, but you never know who you could end up meeting in real life from the internet. So Gluten, let's never meet again, and let's not meet in real life, and I hope you stop flirting with 12-year-olds. It's really for your own good. When I was 18, I was living in a small town. I was friends with the ratty skaters around, and they helped connect with this dude who sold weed. He was 29 at the time and gave me pretty good deals and lived nearby. I wasn't driving at the time, so this was convenient for me. His name was Max. Max has always struck me as a weird dude, but I honestly quite liked his weirdness. Not in a romantic way or anything, but I liked weird people. We had normal weed buying interactions that never lasted more than 10 minutes. Buy some weed, maybe smoke a bowl, that's it. He'd often tell me he could drop it off at my house, but I never let him because, as I said before, he was weird. I wasn't afraid of him, but was definitely aware that he and his offers to deliver were weird. One day, in May 2018, I was invited to a bonfire by the same ratty skaters that introduced me to this guy. I had no idea he'd be there, nor was it important to me at all. I brought the guy I was dating at the time. I said hey to everyone, including Max. We stayed for a couple hours, and some of us played some music on their guitars. Nearing the time I was leaving the bonfire around 11 p.m., Max was getting upset about something and threw his guitar into the bonfire. I didn't know what he was angry or upset about and paid no mind to it. This happened as I was leaving with the guy I was dating. I went to bed and woke up to paragraphs on paragraphs of crazy texts from Max, ranging from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m., like a constant stream of texts stating things such as, "You know how much I loved you. You're a cruel cunt. How could you go back and forth between saying, I would give you the world if you'd let me, and you really deserve him though." He said really scary things like, "You are a predator and you should be snubbed out. Just wait." And "You are stuck. I will either love you or hate you to the fullest extent of my powers. Behold, right now, I pay the worst death on you, that fuckboy bitch." To top it all off, he said, "Losing you is like losing a mother to me," and told me to tell him I never loved him and that I wouldn't hear from him again if I did. So that's what I did. I said, "I never loved you. Do not message me again." And I left it at that. I didn't get a response, nor did I care to get one. Max had never expressed any romantic interests, never asked me out or anything. This was all out of nowhere, and he was 11 years older than me. I was barely 18. That night, he cut his long hair off and posted photos naked on Facebook, curled up in a fetal position, talking about being a statue of shame. It's as if he had had a breakdown, but I had no intention of causing that. I did not think that I would even offend anyone by bringing the guy I was seeing, and everyone else seemed to like the guy I'd brought. About a week later, Max texted me pretty late at night and asked if I had seen the flowers he spread across my sidewalk, saying that he stole every flower in the vicinity of my neighborhood that night. I asked how he knew where I lived, and I said I haven't seen the flowers, so he must have had the wrong house. I also told him that he shouldn't be doing things like that. I never felt anything for him, and so on. He told me that he had heard I lived on the same block as another one of the skater guys who were both friends with him, and he wasn't wrong. The skater guy that I lived by was on the other side of the block, and I never walked that way, so I never saw the flowers. I blocked his number and didn't hear from him again for weeks. Weeks later, I woke up after a rough night, and there was loads of flowers on the sidewalk right outside my house, along with the little banquet at the top of my walkway. I was pissed. I wasn't scared yet, and stupidly, I unblocked his number and texted him asking why the fuck there were flowers outside of my house. This confirmed that this indeed was where I lived. I still, to this day, feel so stupid for texting him and making it known that after weeks he had found my house. He responded saying, sounds nice. This was me. I bitched him out basically and blocked his number again. About a week later, I was out of town and my roommate texted me a photo of a heart with a peace sign inside of it and my name written under it, drawn in chalk outside my house. When I got back into town, I went to the courthouse and began the process of getting a stalking order against him. When I left the courthouse, I went to Max's work and told him he needed to stop this behavior, that he was stalking me. He looked me in the eyes with no facial expression and said, "If you do not leave, I am calling the cops." I got angry and said loudly, "Call the fucking cops! I was just talking to them about you!" and left his work in a rage. Soon after this, I began driving again. I once drove by him and he noticed it was me. The next day, I woke up with my car covered in flowers. I presented my case to the judge and she put the stalking order in place. He was served with it by police officers, and I thought that was that, and he wouldn't be bothering me again. I was wrong. After the stalking order was served, He made several other chalk messages on my sidewalk, left random gifts for me like chalk, and beheaded my little pony heads on beer bottles. I always brought these things to the police station, but they said I needed to catch him doing it, take a photo, and get security cameras. So I got a security camera and really hoped I would catch him. It turned out my security camera was stupid, and I couldn't just watch the videos it took, but had to skip through second by hand. It was an impossible task. I was terrified of leaving my house at night at this point. I never had my curtains open anymore, and I was so frustrated that my livelihood was being taken away from me. Ultimately, I blocked his number in hopes that he would text me directly, violating the stalking order, and after a few days, it worked. He sent me a weird text saying something like, "Forgive me. We are charming. This is harming. Let us try again." By now, it's September 2018, and he finally goes to jail. He is facing up to a year in jail, and has to stay there until our court date. I finally start calming down. I am able to go outside at night, even if just to get in my car. I let myself have my curtains open sometimes. I am starting to feel alive again. Right when I start feeling secure in my small town life again, someone posts bail, and he was released after only 3 months in jail, and I went back to living in fear. We still had court dates coming up, and I was optimistic that he would serve more time for ruining my life for so long. His lawyer kept pushing the court date back to gather evidence, and after about 6 months of pushing it back, the state decided he wouldn't do anything more and closed the case, basically. I had to move out of town 3+ hours away at this point, so he didn't actually have an option to continue this behavior. Living in a new place, I feel safe. I can walk at night and don't have to have my curtains closed all the time. It's been over a year since they decided to close the case. About a month ago, he began responding to my friends' Instagram stories, friends that live here in this small town, telling them how fond he is of me, etc. I have always had him blocked, but my Instagram isn't private, so he must have found them that way. I have since changed my account to private, and he hasn't messaged any more friends of mine. I refuse to be fearful now. The way I was then, he will never find where I live or where I work now. However, my life is forever changed after this experience. I will always be more aware of people and their weird energy. I will always close my curtains early in the evening and make sure all the windows and doors are locked. I will always live in a little bit of fear. Maybe not of him, but of it happening again. He ruined my life for a year, and I truly wish he had gotten that time in jail. He deserves it. So Max, let's not meet again. A couple of years ago, when I was in high school, my friends and I were big into paranormal. We lived in shit-fuck Indiana, so there isn't really a lot going on around here. There were 6 of us, 4 boys and 2 girls, myself and Quinn, Donnie, Chris, Larry, and Steven. There were more to our little clique, but the rest of them didn't want to fuck around in cemeteries at 1 a.m. So, one summer night, I get a text from Donnie asking if Quinn and I wanted to go check out this place around Brazil. Quinn said yeah, so I said yeah, and in the hour, we were all piled into Donnie's truck. Now the truck has enough room for 5 people, 2 front, 3 back, and one of us had to ride in the bed. It's Indiana. We don't give a shit here. We'll die on the highway flying out of a pickup bed. Why not? So we head down to I-70 and pull off into Brazil exit, and Donnie takes us down to this road I don't recognize. We keep going sort of south and then land on this gravel road. The road turns to dirt because Chris didn't want to ride alone in the back. Steven was with him. So it was me and Quinn in the back seat, Larry and Donnie up front, and Chris and Steven out in the back. and they keep sticking their hands through the small sliding windows and poking us in the back of the head like 17-year-old fuckboys do. After maybe 20 minutes, we get to this long, overgrown driveway sort of road. It's gravel, but you can tell it's unkept and never traveled on. We go down it, avoiding a ton of potholes, and finally make it under this railroad bridge. There is a shit ton of graffiti everywhere, and it's just all around not looking good. So I hear Chris and Steven start whispering and stuff about it being spooky. Donnie turns off the truck and says we should get out. Now, all the graffiti was your typical bullshit 14-year-old white boy satanic shit, so I wasn't going to play that game. I'd rather go kick up graveyard dirt than deal with getting my skin flayed by redneck Satanists. So Quinn and I say no, and we said we should go check out 4 Arcs, because that's not far away, a little north of Brazil, I believe. Donnie eventually agrees to it, so he starts backing out of the tunnel. Chris and Steven start screaming, and in the mirror you can see someone standing at the end of the tunnel opening. They start trying to climb through the little pothole-sized window, and Quinn and I are pulling them to help them. And this dude starts Olympic sprinting at the truck, and you can see in the brake lights that he has a machete. So Donnie just floors it in reverse and almost hits that dude. Our windows were down, and you could hear him smash into the wall to avoid us. And he spins us around, and we take off. We never went back there, and I never heard anyone having a good experience there either. Last summer, the 6 of us go out again to this place called Edna Collins Bridge. It's not a super popular place, I guess. I don't know. It's near Clinton Falls and Brick Chapel, maybe an hour from Crawfordsville, and 20 minutes from Green Castle. We had been to both Brick Chapel and Collins a few times, so it wasn't a big deal to us, just somewhere to fuck around. Now, if you've ever been to a local haunt, I can assume that, like us, teenagers flock there to fuck with people. I've heard stories of people hiding in the bridge and knocking on car windows in the dark, etc. But we had been there multiple times and had never seen anyone do that. Just people parking on the bridge and doing the ritual, turn off car, beep 3 times, wait for spook. So Donnie is driving, Quinn is up front because they're dating, and the 4 of us decide to ride in the bed because the last time we did it, it's not like 2 people almost got killed by a machete or anything. We're going down 36 and pull onto the road that leads to the bridge. We eventually get there and notice there is this blue car pulled off near the bridge. Okay, probably kids. It's parked on the northern side of the bridge after you cross over, so we just roll across the bridge and glance at it. There isn't anyone inside, so we assume they are off fucking around like we plan to be. We go down the road and turn around at the first house, right off the bridge, and pull back through and head back to 36 and go fuck around at Bridge Chapel Cemetery. 2 hours later, it's now fully dark and maybe 10 p.m. We go back and the car is gone and it's empty, so we pull off before the bridge and start walking around it. And looking at the new graffiti, there are flowers in the middle of the bridge, kinda like a bouquet. Donnie picks them up and gives them to Quinn, who throws them into a gap into the woods, into the water. Immediately after that, we hear this splashing noise, like from under the bridge. We all get really quiet, and Larry, being the big fuck that he is, starts yelling and asking what ghosts were there and how ghosts were pussies. Then the splashing gets really loud, and we see the shadow climb out over the guardrail at the end of the bridge. Then another one on the other side. Then thump, some fucking dudes drop out of the rafters right in the middle of us. Quinn screams and I stumble back into Larry, who just picks me up, and Donnie is screaming at the dude who dropped down next to us. The dude starts screaming back about how we were trespassing. We weren't. It's a public road. And he starts screaming how he is going to fucking kill us In the moonlight, you can see that he is way older than us, probably 40s. He is spitting and frothing at the mouth. Chris immediately says he's a meth head, so we all take off back to the truck, and the three guys chase us. For some reason, Steven thinks, oh, I'm going to get in the bed of the truck, and then flops in, and then so does the skinny meth head, and they start wrestling in the truck, and finally Steven throws him out, and Donnie peels off, and we go home. A few months later, we decided to return. Unlike the last time, there wasn't anyone there, and we went driving the day because the boys were wimps. The area is actually very pretty during the day, so we fucked around and crawled under the bridge. Down there was graffiti, typical, but there was this patch of loose dirt that Larry found. He kicked it and opened it, and inside was a folding knife with some sort of dried stuff on it, probably blood, stained clothing, and 3 different models of cell phones. We never went back. Hello. For context, I'm a 28-year-old blonde woman, and I look around 18 to 22, or so I'm told. I recently went back to college for human resources, so I was on the train at 1 p.m. on a Monday to get to a 3 p.m. class. The train comes from outside the city, and it's super dead during the day when it's not rush hour. I got on the train, I walked upstairs, but decided to go to the middle area. There's a middle area next to a bathroom because someone was humming and I thought it was annoying. The washroom door was closed the whole time. I didn't think anyone was in there. I was alone on the middle area with no one around me. I was sitting with my jacket off, drinking a tea out of my bunny mug with my backpack across from me. Completely comfortable because the GO train is typically a calm ride. A man pops out of the bathroom after 5 minutes of me sitting there. He is around 22 years old. He has white fine line scars in the shape of a heart and a 3D cube on his head. He puts his hands on my backpack. I assume he's going to try to mug me. I think I'm going to punch him in the throat and run because this isn't my first attempted mugging. My body froze because his first words were, I'm going to kill my father tonight, and I'm going to make you help me. He doesn't want my debit card. He wants to hurt me. I currently work in mental health. I am used to working with people with homicidal thoughts. I don't scare easily when someone says their voices say to kill me because I feel like I have all the resources I need and the rapport with my people. I don't know this man. Immediately, I knew this isn't just thoughts or a case of being lonely and talking to random strangers. He's not seeking help from me. I need to leave, but his leg is blocking me in. It sounds like you're going through a lot right now. I'm sorry to hear you are upset with your dad. Tell me more about it. I grab my backpack. I know I look terrified because I just know this isn't good. He says, no, you are fucking not. Because women like you fucking sleep with my fucking dad, you fucking bitch. He gets closer and corners me into the seat. He says he's going to make me help him kill his dad with a knife tonight because he's tired of pretty women like me always ignoring him but fucking with his dad, asking me why I do stuff like that. I feel terrified, and I realize that we are 2 feet away from a washroom, and I am scared he's going to try and make me go in there, and my body is just frozen. His face gets closer to mine. I scream at the top of my lungs, help me! Help me! Help! And honestly, I didn't even recognize my voice. I sounded terrified. 4 random train people came running in. 1 man, 2 young women, and one middle-aged woman. One of the men asked me if I'm okay. The guy across from me puts his legs down and is screaming, "Oh, help me, I'm a vain woman. We're all vain and cruel, and I want someone pretty, not like him," as he motions to his scars. I bolt upstairs. I couldn't even talk for a minute. My hands were shaking. I have been in some scary situations before, but I was comfortable with my commute, not on guard like I am at work. One of the other men who came to help me sees that he is mad and still yelling. I honestly don't remember what. He tells me to run towards the customer service train and he'll make sure that he doesn't follow me. We press the yellow security strip before I get up and go, and the train starts beeping, but there was no security to come. The guy who came to help me found me later when the train stopped and told me that he had strolled off the train like nothing had even happened. However, 2 young girls who came to me had their phones and took a lot of pictures of him walking away and gave them to the police. I walked to the customer service train. The police came, but the man was gone. They talked to me for a few minutes and said that they know who he is because the scars on his face and because he did something similar yesterday, and they think that he might be mentally ill. The police officer didn't seem very interested in talking to me. They asked if I saw his knife. I said no, but it doesn't surprise me because he mentioned a knife, and the way he spoke was the confidence of a man with a weapon. They obviously do not care what I think he could have had. They explained that he slapped another woman on the train, and someone saw he had a knife out at some point. And someone had called the cops before we even pressed the emergency strip, but the customer service train guy didn't even know that. He only knew my story because no one else pressed the security strip and came running to him. I just want to say that someone with mental illness can be homicidal, but it's not a symptom of who they are as a person. It's a sign of how unwell they are at the moment. Not all people with mental illness have homicidal thoughts or are violent at all. I know very kind and wonderful people who have homicidal thoughts when they go through life transitions. These people do not scare me. Maybe this man had mental health issues, but this man scared the hell out of me. So I'm glad that the people came running to me when I called, and the young girls took pictures, because my gut tells me he would have done something if I didn't start screaming. I sincerely hope if he had mental health issues that they took him to a hospital so he's not roaming free. The worst part of this is that I saw a young lady between 18 and 20 years old crying at the train station the next day, and I overheard her saying that she cried and hid in the washroom the entire train ride to the station because a man scared her when she got on the train, and she had to call her parents to pick her up. I have no clue if it was the same guy, but I felt like it was possible, and it bothers me that he's bothering other women, but especially young girls who might be too scared to scream. It's been a few months and the police have never contacted me on if they caught him. He never actually touched me, so I guess it wasn't serious enough for them. It made me permanently anxious on my commute, and I never sit alone or take my jacket off anymore. I'm never really comfortable on the train. Scary man with the heart and box scarred on his face. Let's not meet again. I met this kid in middle school. He was pretty sweet. A generally nice but weird kid. That's fine. Everybody's a bit weird in their own ways. He was a Boy Scout and he knew some weird facts. I gave him the usernames on my YouTube channel, Kick, Snapchat, and some other accounts that I can't remember. He added, followed me on all of those accounts. He tried to flirt and convince me to leave my boyfriend because he was better than him and that he loved me more. I stuck to being his friend all throughout middle school despite our differences. He was also mentally unstable. I didn't think we were going to have classes in high school together. We had one, honors biology. During that class, he continued to flirt with me on the low key and tried to get me to go to his house so he could tutor me as I complained about my grades. I didn't do the work, but I didn't need the tutoring. I just needed to do my work. He was also kinda creepy, and I was counting down the days until sophomore year started. He had even purchased Overwatch for me and told me to play Mercy so that we could be the ultimate support duo and wreck our foes together. I played on PC with him once or twice, but I got sick of it because the computer I played on was shit. We had classes up until I learned he was going to move to a different school. Perfect. Now I wouldn't have to see him again. He signed my yearbook and told me he was going to Brazil. Perfect. Then out of the blue, when summer vacation had just started, he wanted to see me one last time before I would go on to be color guard for another year and have no summer. Plus, with him going to Brazil to visit family, I said, what the hell, why not? We decided to meet up by an abandoned park close to our houses and chat for a bit. I asked my mom, she said sure. She dropped me off for a bit with some money so we could hang out. We head over to the spot we agreed to meet at, and I only have to wait a minute or so before he rides up on his bike. My mom and I get out of the car so she can meet him. So you're the stalker guy that my daughter wanted to meet up with? Yes, ma'am. That's me. Mom, come on. I just wanted to hang out for a bit, like I said. Ah, okay. So what time do you want me to pick her up? 4? 5? Mom, stop. You're embarrassing me. I will call you when I'm ready. Hey, actually, I think I gotta get back home to pack. Nice meeting you, Mrs. Okay, bye. And like that, he rode away on his bike, fast, my mom and I watching him go. We got into the car, silently, and began to drive home, not a word spoken between us. Once we got home, she grabbed my arm before I went inside and held me by my shoulder. You said you knew that kid, right? From where? Jesus fucking Christ, Mom, I know him from school. Why? Is there something wrong? Mom stared a hole through me for a few seconds, and then she said, Don't tell your father this, but did you notice how he kept fidgeting and stuttering? Yeah. He was probably fucking nervous. His shirt had a snake on it, and snakes were known in the Bible for what? Who took on the form of a snake? Oh God, Mom. Yeah, your religion. Satan. And what about it? What did Satan do? Oh God, kill people. He's probably going to try to stab you. What? What? Really? You think that because he has a fucking snake on his shirt that he's going to try to stab me? Because the Bible says that Satan was a snake? What the fuck is wrong with you? He was fidgeting because he had a weapon. Lord told me not to leave you alone because he had evil intentions. He told you to go to a nearly abandoned park to hang out right by a freeway.
he was gonna try and murder you and dump your body on the side of the road. Yeah. Okay, Mom, sure. You said he was going to Brazil, right? And moving schools. Cut off contact with him. Never talk to him again. He'll try to harm you or anyone else in our family if he gets the chance. After listening to this stupid bitch, we went outside. I blocked him on every single platform I could have imagined. Somehow, as stupid as my mom is, it all made sense. He was a Boy Scout, making him knowledgeable about all sorts of things. He browsed the internet and loved crime stories, thus giving him all sorts of ideas. He knew and discussed with me multiple times on how to dispose of a body. I was ignorant and stupid. I distanced myself from him, but he messaged me and gave me an ultimatum while in Brazil. Break up with your boyfriend, or I'll throw myself off of a cliff and end my life. I added him and my boyfriend to a group chat and tried to calm him down. He did, for a short while, until it started up again. We decided, fuck it. We blocked his account and thought that was the end of it. He made multiple other accounts and spammed us. We made new Kick accounts with very different usernames and moved on. He followed me on my new Instagram after I posted about it on my old one. He added me on my new Snapchat that I had made sophomore year. I wanted it to be over, so I tried to find the accounts and block them, with no success. He blended right in and was likely catfishing me without me realizing. I became more and more paranoid. I grew scared. I couldn't look or hear a name similar to his without nearly having a mental breakdown. I did not want to trust anyone, and soon after it began to break me down. I took an interest in knives, and once I turned 18, just a couple of months ago, I bought my first one. I feel so much safer with it, and bought an additional 3 along with a beautiful katana because of the fears of being attacked. They are my beautiful children, all good girls and boys. About 2 weeks ago, my boyfriend flew out from the opposite side of the US to come to my prom. We got fancied up, looked nice, and headed out. We got to the venue, and we were waiting for 2 of my friends and one of their boyfriends. When I see him, I paused for a moment before realizing that I'm with my boyfriend in a public space with camera and security guards all around me. One small move, and I'll scream. We make eye contact, but he was more focused on his date, a fellow ex-guard member. My old friend and I chat for a bit, then I ignore him. So, to my stalker who wanted to stab me to death, let's not meet again, and please, don't stab me if you find me. I'm at my parents' house with my mother drinking coffee. I had decided to drop by unexpectedly to spend some time with her since I had worked a lot the weeks before and hadn't heard much from her. So we were talking when the intercom starts ringing. My mother goes to see who it is, picks up the receiver, and the expression on her face changes. She seems stressed, but she opens the door anyway. She then comes back to me saying it's a guy she met on Facebook that she hasn't seen for a year and a half, but we have to say that we are going to my grandma's, so he won't stay long. I'm starting to think that it's weird, but we hear knocking, so my mom will open the door while I stay in my chair overlooking the entrance. I see a rather tall man coming in with a normal build, bald, with small glasses. As soon as he entered the apartment, I felt the atmosphere change. Something
oppressive was squeezing my chest. He kisses my mother and turns his head towards the living room where I am. Then he frowns when he sees me, as if he was surprised to find me here. I don't like it. His gaze is empty and disturbing. He says hello to me from afar and walks into the living room, grabs a chair, and sits down. My mother then asks him what he's doing here and why he arrived without calling first. I'm sorry, I didn't take my phone. Actually, I'm coming from the hospital next door. I escaped, and since you told me you lived around here, I decided to stop by and say hello. At first, I thought he was joking, especially since he said it with a big smile. But his eyes were really weird, and his attitude too. My mother laughed nervously and asked him if he was serious, to which he replied that he was. He even gave us the name of the town he came from and told us how he ran away. He tells us that he was outside with 3 doctors on a Terrence, that the doctors came in before him while telling him to follow them, and that he took the opportunity to leave, passing over a hedge that overlooks a road where there is a bus stop. He got on the first passing bus and found himself not far from our house. He didn't know our exact address, but thanks to my mom, who gives her real name on social media networks, he knew his last name, and he searched all the interphones in the neighborhood before finding out where we were. While he was telling this story, I went on Google Maps to check where he said he was coming from, and everything matched. The hedge looking over the road, the back Terrence, the bus stop. But most of all, it's not just any hospital he escaped from, it's a psychiatric hospital. So I started to get really scared for myself, but especially for my mother. We have an escapee from a mental hospital in our house. He then explains to my mother that if she hasn't heard from him for a year, it's because he came back there a year and a half ago after he lost his wife and all of his money, but he didn't linger on it for very long. It was way too much for me, so I got up and said I had to go to my room. I went in. The door wasn't closing, but I took my phone and I called my best friend, who is a security guard and who lives 20 minutes away by car. I tell him what's going on, and he decides to come, armed with a knife, just in case. When I hang up the phone and go out of my room, I see the man in the corridor near the door. He tells us that he's going to have to leave because people are probably looking for him, and that he has to go to a friend's house, but he has to take the train. We say goodbye to him, and he leaves, but that's not all. I then explained to my mother what just happened, that she was crazy to have given her name and address, even approximate to a stranger on the internet, and then she tells me that last year she was at his house with my father, that his wife was there, and that they all had a great time, so she didn't consider him dangerous. I still tell her that someone you have only seen once is not someone you can trust. My buddy arrives then, sooner than expected. We decided to call the hospital to make sure what he said was true, and especially to warn them that someone might be missing from their institution. So we call, and the secretary picks up. We explain our story. She seems surprised, so she puts us on hold, and she checks it out. When she comes back, she tells us that he is not in his room anymore, and that all of his stuff is there, and that they hadn't noticed he was gone. It had been more than 2 hours since he had escaped, but since the guards had seen his belongings when they passed by the door, they hadn't worried. She, however, warns us that he is a dangerous psychopath who had a crisis after his wife left him, that he can be extremely violent if he is upset. At that particular moment, I only could think about one thing. What would have happened if I hadn't been there with my mother, if she had been alone with that guy? She told us that they were going to do whatever was necessary. We asked her if we could be kept informed when they found him, but she told us she had no right to give us that kind of information. We then raised our voices and explained that we shouldn't be afraid of him coming back every day, and she apologizes but can't do anything about it. We hang up the phone and decide with my friend to go for a walk around the neighborhood for several hours and the next few days to see if he's still there, but we never saw him again. My friend Joe told me this story a few years ago. Joe was a nurse at one of the hospitals in my area, working an overnight shift at a psychiatric ward. It was late at night, and some of the other staff had brought in a woman who was having a psychiatric break. She wouldn't stop screaming, no matter what they did or said. She also was screaming nonsense, no words, just straight up screaming. So they decided at first to let her kind of just blow off steam. They figured she would stop screaming eventually, so Joe was put on watch duty for her. She was put into an isolated room with a camera in it. He was put in a position where he could see her, but also could see her on the camera footage in case he needed to. When they put her into the room, his peer told him, "She's in there for now. We will check up on her in a while. For the time being, watch over her, but don't look at her. Just don't. It'll make it worse, and it'll just be better if you watch her through the cameras." The woman continued to scream for hours and hours. High-pitched, horrifying screams. He said eventually he noticed that her screams were sounding really messed up and gurgling, which made him decide to look at her through the glass, since it was rather alarming to hear her voice suddenly change like that. He looked over and saw her staring right at him, still screaming, and she had managed to spew blood all over the window on the door because she had been screaming so hard for so long that her throat started bleeding and flakes of blood were flying everywhere. It was like something out of a horror movie, and I can only imagine it was as such. Eventually, they had to sedate the woman because she was starting to shred her vocal cords from the insane amount of screaming. To this day, I still get so spooked thinking about how horrifying that experience must have been, but also horrified that something like that could actually happen. I'm from Scotland, and my workmates took a trip to Newcastle for a friend's hen party. A hen party is the Scottish version of a bachelorette party. We'd went to a few pubs and clubs that night and settled on the Livello nightclub. I have autism, so generally I am not very good with my social skills, but they insisted that I go along with them and that it'd help my confidence. What would happen to me this night would ruin me forever. Unlike other people, I can hear sounds and noises a lot different from other people. My friends were dancing to the loud music. For them, it was fun. For me, it was just white noise to an extreme level, a very high-pitched tone ringing in my ears. I really regretted going out. I just sat there while they danced, and I'd seen this guy from a distance hanging from the balcony. Luckily, some bouncers caught him. When he fell, I was relieved but felt disgusted at the same time that someone could get himself in such a state. He was removed from the nightclub. My anxiety levels had skyrocketed, and I couldn't handle the music anymore. I told my friends that I felt sick and wanted to head back to the hotel. So they tell me to stay safe and phone a taxi, to which I did. I was waiting outside for more than an hour in the pouring rain. No taxi had appeared. I phoned back countless times, but they said the taxi service was busy and it'd take a while to get one to me. The doorman showed me directions to a taxi rank and said I'd get one quicker if I joined the taxi queue. I'd walked down, taking his instructions. It was very dark and rainy at this moment, and eerily quiet. That was until he popped up from an alley, the guy from the balcony. He was pissing in there. He looked like your typical English hooligan, shaved head and topless, and some horrible torn denims, and a beer bottle in hand. I continued walking, and I could sense him following me. "Oi," he said. "Oi, you." I don't know why I did it, but I turned around. "Do you got the time?" I told him the time, put my head down, and kept walking. He tried to catch up with me, staggering a bit because he was drunk. "Where you from?" he asked. "Oi, I'm talking to you. Where you from? You one of them Markhams?" A Macomb is a slang term for someone from Sunderland, Newcastle's sworn rivals in football. I'd said no, I'm Scottish. He'd rambled on some more, but I chose to ignore him. "Oi, listen, I am talking to you." He reached his hand to grab my shoulder and nearly tripped up. I'd laughed a little because I couldn't help it. "What the fuck are you laughing at, you Scottish cunt?" he said, reaching for me again. By instincts, I started to run. I just didn't feel comfortable with him there. He started to chase me. "Oi, get back here, you slut!" He kept shouting. My high heels had fell off, and I was running in my bare feet. I couldn't run anymore because I was out of breath and my feet really hurt. I went into a phone box to protect myself from him, and he tried to barge the door in. I'd gripped onto it so hard, putting all my weight onto it. He started ranting at me. "You fucking skank, wait till I get you. I'm gonna teach you a fucking lesson." He started kicking the door, and it almost moved. I was screaming for help, and there were some passers-by, but they ignored my calls for help. He kept kicking at the door and nearly got in. I jammed my fingers, but still held on for my life. I then used my feet to hold it even tighter. He threw his glass bottle at the door, and the booze had spilled everywhere, soaking the whole phone box. I was worried it was going to smash the glass. He'd have definitely got me by then. "Hey, you fucking cunt, why don't you go back to Kiltland and eat haggles and whatever shit you people eat?" He started mocking the Scottish accent before chanting, "England, England, England." I just couldn't stop myself from crying, and I kept screaming for him to leave me alone. I could actually feel my throat get sore. I'd screamed so much. He then pulled out his penis and started rubbing it against the glass and said, "I'm going to make you suck this dirty slapper." After another aggressive struggle, he managed to get his hand in and grabbed me, but I'd kicked the door shut against his arm and jammed his fingers. When I kicked it again, he was reeling in agony and had blood pouring out of him. Some passers-by had tried to warn him off, and he pulled out his penknife from his pocket and threatened them with it. He got into a brawl with two guys from the group, and I took the opportunity to run away while his back was turned. I remember my bare feet ended up with glass in them, but I was in so much shock. I just kept running. The rain never stopped pouring. I spent the next hour at the taxi rank freezing cold. I'd lost my jacket when I ran. I can't remember how I'd ended up without it, but I had blood pouring from my feet. I remember I could see it mixing in with the raindrops on the concrete. The taxi driver asked if I was okay. I shivered constantly with fear as well as the cold, and I couldn't stop crying. I could barely talk, but managed to tell him about my ordeal. He told me to go to the hospital or to the police, but I just wanted to go home at this stage. Had to settle for my hotel room, of course. After a trip to the hospital, I'd gotten 4 stitches in my feet with antibiotics to avoid infection. I'd went back to Scotland the next night without my friends. I was too scared to do anything. I reported him to the police, but nothing ever came of it, and I never heard anything back from them. This happened when I was 16 years old. I was driving home in my new car. It was raining in San Diego County that evening and was dark out. We lived a bit away from the town, houses with bigger yards, no stores really, etc. As we drove past a larger intersection with a gas station and nothing else for a few blocks, I saw a man sitting in a wheelchair on the side of the road, alone, in a hospital gown, in the rain. There was no hospital anywhere close by at all. I froze for a bit and then yelled at my mom to look. At the last second she did, and she saw him too, which thank God, because I would have been sure I had made it up. Again, a man in a wheelchair in the pouring rain. Hair was plastered against his face, in a hospital gown, alone. I still think about it to this day, and if I ever have to go back to that town and drive past that intersection, I get shivers. No hospitals for miles. There weren't any businesses besides the gas station for at least a mile. I'm now 29 years old, and this happened 13 years ago. If you're new, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, as it really helps me out. And if you are already subscribed, welcome back and thank you for subscribing.